Magic.me is the world's greatest school for magic, meditation, and mysticism. You can learn everything there, from chaos magic to hermeticism to meditation to how to supercharge your finances and take absolute control of your destiny. In short, you get all of the tools you need to turn chaos into beautiful, scintillating order and master your life. It's incredible. You've probably heard me talk about it on the show quite a lot. But check it out. It's growing fast. And I just want to say, if you're confused about where to start, because I have so many courses there, the Adept Initiative is the place to go. The Adept Initiative is the flagship course on Magic.me, and it contains everything you need to know to master the most profound ancient techniques of changing your consciousness and the most modern and cutting-edge tools and systems for absolutely turning your life into a masterpiece. You're really going to dig it. Go check it out, and I will see you in class. It's magic.me, magick.me. Yes, hello. It's Jason Louv. Welcome back to the Ultra Culture Podcast. My guest today is Faraday Speaks, who is, I guess I can describe him as a de-radicalization YouTuber. He and I spoke together 3 whole years ago. This interview has been sitting in the can for 3 years, I am embarrassed to say. Here's what happened. Faraday Speaks did a YouTube at that time that blew up, went super viral, got huge traction, that was about his experience being radicalized into the alt-right by, in his words, falling into a YouTube pipeline. He says that he was drifting in life, ended up watching the wrong YouTubes, and slowly becoming radicalized into the alt-right movement. He then got out of it and has spent the last several years helping other people get out of it. The YouTube got so big that actually the New York Times picked it up almost right away, and it got a tremendous amount of mainstream coverage. And I spoke to him almost immediately after, I think within a few days. And we ended up having a great conversation. We talked for 3 hours just about his life, his experience of becoming radicalized, realizing that he was suddenly in a far-right racist cult, leaving it, helping others to leave it, and just having a broader conversation about the alt-right, extremism, racism in America, and I think broadly speaking, how extremist ideologies prey on people. So, unfortunately, I think right after we did this episode, there was kind of this, suddenly there was this there was this Twitter narrative happening all of a sudden that he might actually be like a Nazi troll who was trolling from 4chan. That is definitely not the case. He's been doing his de-radicalization videos ever since, but it was enough of a concern at the time. I mean, I didn't think that was really even in the realm of possibility after speaking to him, but it was such a narrative at the time, I just figured I would at least wait for a little bit. And I actually asked him about it on Twitter. But then as things happen, I got wrapped up in other stuff. I was doing other stuff with the business. And then lo and behold, COVID happened, and 2 years of drama, mayhem, and panic ensued, including moving 7 times. I had no idea where the file was. So long, you don't need to know the story. It's meaningless, but I have just found the file. And so finally, apologies to Faraday Speaks. It has been 3 years in coming, but I am finally putting out the episode. Now, I did record an intro a few days ago for this in which I said, maybe this is more of a historical piece. It's more about where politics were at during the Trump administration. The alt-right, as a movement online appears to have been scattered to the 4 winds. I don't think it really exists anymore, etc. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Faraday Speaks put his video out shortly after the Christchurch shootings in New Zealand. And in the middle of putting this episode together, very tragically, we've had another one in Buffalo that appears to be inspired by the Christchurch shooting, that, is definitely a white supremacist attack in which a manifesto was issued, much like the Christchurch one. So I was being just a tad naive in saying that this was historical. It is unfortunately just as relevant, if not more relevant now than when we recorded it. So unfortunately, very unfortunately, I don't think this is a problem that's going away anytime soon. And I don't know what else I can say about that that's not going to come off as kind of trite thoughts and prayers. It's an ongoing tragedy and an ongoing infection that we have to deal with as a society. So I hope that this podcast is helpful in contextualizing things. I think it's a great podcast, and I'm glad that I'm finally able to bring it out. So with no further ado, here is Faraday Speaks.
How's it going? Thank you.
It's going great. It's going great, Jason. Today was a nice day. I went for a little drive, came home, and then was excited to talk to you.
Awesome. So I saw your video. Your video has been all over the internet. I saw your video yesterday, actually, in the ContraPoints Dank Meme Stash Facebook group. And I felt like I needed to reach out to you, and I really wanted to talk to you because I feel like you have the potential of a really strong voice that is needed right now. And your video, just to briefly recap, I think it's about 40 minutes, and you talk about how you had got drawn into the alt-right. And then particularly, if I'm correct in recapping your video, that particularly after the, I think before and then particularly after the Christchurch shooting, realized you were in very, very dangerous territory and that you needed to get out. And so I wanted to talk to you, and I wanted to see what your experience has been like. And I particularly, I think that it's such a crucial conversation to be having right now, particularly because I think that there has been so much warfare online and along the political spectrum. And particularly after the seriousness of Christchurch, we cannot any longer pretend how big of a problem this is. And I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. And so I think that voices like yours, people who were in this, kind of decentralized online cult, as you put it, and then got out, are really, really powerful, and perhaps the most powerful way to actually combat this, rather than, it's just showing people, what it was showing people that there is a way out, perhaps. But I've rambled too much. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story, please?
I'm from West Virginia. I've grown up here my whole life. I was born out of state, but shortly after my birth, I was brought into state. Grew up here my whole life, had a rough home life with my family, didn't get along, didn't see eye to eye. Ironically, there was a lot of racism in my family that I really despised, but it was that kind of old school racism, the type of racism that you saw directed at Barack Obama whenever he became president. And so anybody that's aware of the types of things they were hearing during those times knows what type of racist I'm talking about. The Christchurch shooting is not what spurred me to change my mind. Although I don't know if the Christchurch shooting would have changed my mind. I would have been against it. I would have thought that it was horrible, but I still would have probably sympathized with the manifesto a lot. What brought me out of it was a series of life experiences, and then also being exposed to other YouTubers, which this all goes back to the algorithm, which that's how I was radicalized in the first place. The algorithm favored me one day, and it showed me Destiny, and then it showed me ContraPoints. And between that and the experiences I had at that particular point in life, I realized how wrong I was about everything that I had believed. And
so let's back up and where were you before you kind of got drawn in perhaps by the algorithm, like the YouTube algorithm. Before you were exposed to alt-right ideas, where were you? What was going on in your life? And why was it that, is there something that you think perhaps made you vulnerable to it?
Yeah. So, when I was brainwashed, I believed that everything was just about the work that you put into things, the idea of the meritocracy and justified hierarchies. But now I know that we're a condition of our environment and the variables in our life that line up. And so there were definitely I'm not some innocent soul, that's, I don't mean to put it that way. There were variables that created the circumstances that I led into. It wasn't solely the algorithm to blame. I grew up in West Virginia where there's a lot of economic disenfranchisement. There's not a lot of opportunity for you. And if you mess up your Pell Grant for college, you're done. And that's something that happened to me. I didn't have a good family life growing up. I very much just didn't have that stable support structure. And this wasn't something that I actually realized until recently, even just within the last couple of weeks, that how important having a family and having a strong foundation in your life is. And that's what, keeps you from feeling that sort of anxiety and woe about life. Those things set me up, and I can, if you'd like, I'll tell the actual story, but yeah. So I'll just tell the story. Those things were the things that set me up to be taken in by this message. So growing up, bad home life, lots of yelling, lots of fighting, physical abuse, emotional abuse, everything but sexual abuse, divorce, custody battle. And then I ended up getting raised by a family that quite honestly was not my biological family, but I had a half brother and a half sister. I won't go into that yet. I'll talk about that in more detail in the future in videos, but it's a sad story. And I grew up with a family that was not blood related to me. They didn't look like me, any of that stuff. And I didn't learn the truth till I was much older. Probably about 13, 14. That was devastating. But so when I went to college, in high school, I got picked on, bullied. I actually would go on YouTube a lot in high school when I first got high-speed internet. This was back in like the 2008 days, early YouTube. And I would look at a lot of different stuff. I was curious. I would look at political stuff, religious stuff, a lot of the stuff that you probably cover, occultism. I would look at conspiracy theories. The algorithm would just feed you these things. But in those days, there was no there was no consistency to anything. It was just people uploading things that they had taken from DVDs and stuff. There was no central message to all this stuff. So you'd hop around from Illuminati to Flat Earth to whatever. And as a young, impressionable kid, I would pick up ideas and just throw them away, having no attachment to them. The only thing that probably had the strongest attachment was like the new atheist movement, which is one thing that sucked a lot of people into this. It's not what got me, but a lot of people I talk to in emails get sucked through the pipeline through the atheism.
If I'm correct, it's kind of new atheist to libertarian to alt-right. Is that correct?
Well, no. So for me, I'll tell you how I got sucked into the pipeline, but I get a lot of emails from people that they watched a lot of the Richard Dawkins and a lot of the Christopher Hitchens. And then from there, they got sucked into a guy named TJ Kirk, who did a lot of atheism back in the day. And I would say they did good work.
Is that The Amazing Atheist?
The Amazing Atheist, okay. Yes. And in those days, they were doing very good work. But then as they won the fight against the evangelicals on the internet, they kind of forced them off the platforms because the evangelicals just ran out of arguments and these people were pumping out content. They ran out of material. And then that's when Gamergate happened. And then that's when the anti-SJW rhetoric started. And then Islamophobic rhetoric started, anti-feminist rhetoric started. And then a lot of people found themselves going through the pipeline that route. The way I fell into the pipeline was after I went, I was accustomed to YouTube, going to YouTube for answers. I went to college. I didn't have a support structure. I thought I was chasing all these things, thinking that I needed all these things to support myself. Because my senior year, I had a very productive year and I thought I was ready. I thought I was going to have all these dreams and goals. When I went to college, all fell apart. And then I dropped out, was back at home.
Why did that fall apart?
I was trying to get in with the wrong friend groups. I partied a lot in high school, and then I kind of fell back into hanging out with those types of people. And I just stopped going to class. I became depressed. I stayed in my room a lot playing computer games. I didn't really watch a lot of YouTube at that time. I mostly played computer games and slept and watched Netflix. And I got to stay in the dorm room till the end of the year because they don't kick you out if you don't go to class because your room's paid for. I went back the next year to try again, and the same thing happened. I was chasing people. I roomed with some people in a trailer off campus, and that didn't work out. Fell apart again. Came back home, and then I was stuck. And from that point, I thought, well, there's something wrong with me that I need to fix. Went to YouTube because I knew that YouTube would have answers. I didn't have access to a therapist or anything. And so I went to YouTube for answers. And I started looking at neuroscience, self-help stuff. There was a guy I watched a lot called Athene, a gamer that I had watched in high school. It's really weird. Like the way this works is there's central figures that kind of repeat themselves throughout my life. So Athene was one of those figures. He was someone that I watched in high school and gave me a lot of self-help. Stopped listening to him, picked him up later on down the road and listened to his stuff. I'll send you links later. But talked about self-help, but he was kind of creating a cult of his own that didn't really take off too well. And then from him and watching that kind of content and watching like generic self-help content, found Stefan Molyneux in the sidebar of the algorithm. And Stefan's story resonated with me. He had the same types of life experiences as a kid. He was similar to me in that he was very intelligent, had a lot going for him. And I looked up to him, and I saw him as someone to be looked up to. I kind of set him up as a father figure because I didn't have one in my life. And then from there, he was healing me. He really was. He ingrained things into me like truth, honor, respect, always doing the right thing, being very virtuous and putting virtue above everything else. I love those things. What I didn't know is that all this help he was giving me came at a cost. He was not giving it out for free. And while he was giving me these truths and these virtues, he was also red pilling me. And for anyone that doesn't know, red pill is, it comes from the movie The Matrix. And it's about you take the red pill, Morpheus offers Neo the red pill and he says, do you want to know the truth about reality and wake up? Or do you want to take the blue pill and go back to sleep? And it really works for their rhetoric because it's red, blue, Republican, Democrat. And so it's like the perfect analogy for them, except when you take the red pill that I was given, you don't wake up to the truth. You just roll back over and go right back to sleep. He kept giving me the red pill and I kept taking it and I slowly adopted libertarian beliefs. And then, so from there, you want me to continue as because from there, I just keep going down the funnel.
Yes, when you talk about the red pill, you're broadly talking about the repackaging of conservative, not just conservative ideas, but increasingly far right and even extreme right ideas for people your age, people on YouTube or people on the internet, or gamers in many cases, and packaging it as something, with the frame that it's something that society doesn't want you to know about. And that it's almost kind of like a religious, from my observation of it, it's almost like a religious initiatory process, right? Where you go through, you learn each new thing and then you're self-indoctrinating on the internet. Nobody's there. You're not in a physical cult. Nobody's there over your shoulder forcing you to believe anything. Nobody's threatening you. You're doing all the work yourself. You're self-indoctrinating by consuming all this stuff on the internet, which is stuff that has increasingly become the mainstream cultural discourse, right? So that's my understanding of what the red pill is, but it's really just kind of this complex of all of these these far right ideas that have been packaged in a way to seem enticing to people, right?
Yeah. So from what I understand, it actually started in the pickup artist community where they were kind of red pilling people in the truths about women. You know, and I don't want to get into that because that's a whole other tangent. But then the people like Stefan and the far righters picked it up from there. And I like the way that you put it. The way I just super simplify it and think about it. First of all, it is about chasing uncomfortable truths, and that's why they get you to believe it, because it's like, well, the liberals are emotional, and so you're the one that's willing to contend with the real reality, right? Mm-hmm. And the way I like to think about it, and I think you'll like this, is that you're constantly chasing hidden knowledge. And so you're constantly like, you want more and more, because it's like, well, what is the real truth? What's the real truth? And it is kind of like a cult thing, like where the elites are hiding this reality for me, and I must figure it out. And this person is going to help me figure it out. It's very alluring. And I think that's why when you're on that spectrum, you feel a drive to go deeper. There's something pulling you, like this dark force is pulling you deeper and deeper. I felt it.
What is the emotional, like, without making it intellectual, what is the feeling in your body that you were having as you were consuming this stuff? Was it like you're saying, like a feeling of pull or fascination, or of anger, of enjoying the feeling of anger, of feeling special? I mean, what were you feeling what were you feeling tangibly and physically while consuming this stuff?
So I think it's pretty clear that, like, I was in high school watching a lot of conspiracy theory stuff. And so I was pretty primed to the idea that there's something, and growing up in an environment where things are pretty messed up and no one's coming to the rescue, you get this sense that there's something wrong with the world. There's just something fundamentally wrong. And so from there, you're like, well, what is it? And then you have this like emotional curiosity and this drive to want to figure out what it is. And then once you start to take the red pills, there is an anger. There's an anger that I can't believe I was lied to. I can't believe they held the truth from me. I must know more. And then it's like it's a feeling you get in your chest and your gut. And then it's a feeling of like anxiety, excitement, fear, and anger. It's like the ultimate, I don't know what brain chemical you would relate it back to, but it is the ultimate drug. And it's just, and the way YouTube works, you can constantly get your next dose of it. It's right there. You don't have to wait.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what you skipped ahead a few steps. Yeah, it's kind of what I was angling for, because I think that it's very useful to look at these things almost less like ideologies and more like drugs, right? Because there's this kind of this rush maybe, or this feeling that people get. And this is something that in the 60s and 70s and the 80s, cults, real world cults were very, very good at engineering and figuring it out. Scientology is a good example, where they were able to engineer this feeling of people just getting to the next level. And, there's always something new being revealed. And, anyone who's had experience of, actual drugs knows that feeling of they're being led towards some greater hallucination all the time. And I think that, one thing that has been terrifying and fascinating for me about this whole phenomenon is how much it really does seem exactly what you described. It's this drug experience that you're always being led towards some greater and greater high. This is why heroin users call this chasing the dragon. It's literally like chasing a tail of a dragon that you can never quite grab. And also, while you're destroying yourself and the people around you the whole time, because you're not focused on that, you're focused on just getting to the next thing. And the other thing is, what I think people really need to realize, and I'd love your thoughts about this, is people have this it's not necessarily dismissive, but people have this attitude about the internet, like, oh, the internet is not real life. It's just on the internet. You can always just turn off the computer or your phone and get away from it. But I think the reality is a lot scarier than that, in that even with a real world cult, you can physically leave and escape. But with something like this, it's always going to be there. Because everyone uses the computer now. It's like always there. Like you said, the YouTube algorithms, I guess you'd have to clear your cache and create a completely new YouTube account. but the YouTube algorithms and the Facebook the social media algorithms themselves seem complicit in always providing you with the next kick on whatever tunnel you've gotten yourself into. So there's a real scariness there in that they're kind of, you could be anywhere in the world. And as long as you have a phone or you're on a computer, like that stuff is going to be right there at the corner of your awareness. Just like a heroin dealer would be. It's like if you're a heroin addict, you're sensitized to be able to see heroin dealers, right? So, and I think that in many senses, internet pornography functions in a similar way. So long way of saying, I think that just to say, oh, it's just YouTube or it's just the internet, and therefore it's not as dangerous as a real world, quote unquote, real world group. And then, of course, many of these are real world groups as well that they're funneling people towards. But I think that it makes it even more dangerous in a way.
Yeah, I think you got it pretty perfectly. The best way I could just summarize it is you just want more and more and more. And I have had experience in the past, like I said, I partied in my high school and college days. I've had experience with amphetamines, and yeah, you're constantly just wanting that. Even I was never a long-term user, but even within the span of an evening, you want to keep chasing it and go deeper and deeper. It's interesting you bring up Scientology. The weird thing about this is, though, it doesn't seem like it was constructed, where Scientology seems like it was like built to be that way. But with this, it's like this organic thing that kind of just grew. I don't know. I'm still kind of researching on how much of this was intentional, how much of this was unintentional.
That's a big open question, right? But I think that, and I think that another reason why I think your original video is so important, and I want to talk about this here also, is that you really accurately describe this in a way that the traditional media is completely vulnerable to this, in the sense that all they can really do is wring their hands about it and say, oh, the alt-right, the evil Nazis, but they don't understand it. And it's a completely new phenomenon, right? In the sense that it's not like one group. It's not, oh, Richard Spencer created this or Stefan Molyneux created this, and they have it's like they're misleading. Yes, they have created their own things and they are misleading people, but it's this amorphous thing of all these overlapping ideologies. And that's where I think that people stumble, or they say, well, Jordan Peterson is not alt-right. He's not Richard Spencer, or Stefan Molyneux is not alt-right. It's like, at least they're not that bad. So they're really different things. But I think the reality is, no, it's like a cluster of all these platforms that have interlinked and metastasized into this cancerous thing that is feeding on, feeding people's attention from node to node.
Yeah. And I will have to say, also to go back to your one point, I'll say this about the overlapping. They go on each other's shows. Jordan Peterson goes on a Stefan Molyneux show quite a bit, or at least he was there for a while. Then they'll go on a Steven Crowder show, or then they'll go on to Ben Shapiro, or then, Roaming Millennial will have Richard Spencer on her show, and then Roaming Millennial goes on Steven Crowder's show. So I do have to say, like, and not just the overlapping ideologies. For example, Jordan Peterson talked about cultural Marxism, which is a Nazi conspiracy theory.
Right, it's a huge.
But yes, and there's even conservatives that are believing that now, right? But just for the simple fact, get away from the overlapping ideas.
Just so we don't lose that. I mean, as somebody who was actually radicalized to be a Nazi, you're saying that Jordan Peterson's cultural Marxism, postmodern neo-Marxism thing is a Nazi thing. So I just want to point that out, that this is this is not coming from like, oh, the liberal media is taking him out of context, right?
No, this is, that you can go do a quick Google search and figure this out. Cultural Marxism, white supremacy, we can get into this later. I'd love to. White supremacy repackages itself because society is becoming more liberalized. And so what it has to do is it has to dilute its message. This is why they dog whistle. They don't just dog whistle to protect themselves. They dog whistle to indoctrinate you. And this is how I believed a lot of this stuff, because the red pill was taken apart, put into a little glass of Kool-Aid and handed to me, say, here, this won't be so hard to take down. And that's what cultural Marxism is. Cultural Marxism is a repackaging by Pat Buchanan. Maybe someone else did it, but Pat Buchanan popularized it, of cultural Bolshevism. What is cultural Bolshevism? Look it up, guys.
Death of the West, right? That book he wrote.
The West, I believe. I did not get too much into Pat Buchanan, but I did watch his documentary on cultural Marxism.
Okay. Quite a couple times. That was like the early 2000s.
Yep. He was the one that kind of shifted the conservative movement to the right in a lot of ways, which is constantly what these people are trying to do. So,
but he's also, by the way, who Donald Trump patterned himself after. Donald Trump basically patterned himself directly. He took Pat Buchanan's platform as outlined when Pat Buchanan ran for president in the elections previously. And then he wrote that book, Death of the West, which argues for this whole, it's kind of his repackaging of Oswald Spengler, who wrote, I can't remember the name of Spengler's original book. So Pat Buchanan did kind of like a Spengler light or a Julius Evola light, and repackaged those ideas with this anti-immigrant platform for the U.S. and as a presidential campaign. And so Donald Trump really took that, as well as some thoughts by Steve Sailer and other, fringe conservative ideologues who at that time were very much, even Pat Buchanan was, even though he was a mainstream political candidate, he was very much on the fringe of mainstream U.S. conservatism and was seen as a lunatic, quite rightly, right? But Trump really just took those ideas and combined them with his personal media bombast and got, he picked up the torch, but everything was patterned after Pat Buchanan.
Interesting. I'm going to have to research more into that. But yeah, so Pat Buchanan takes cultural Bolshevism, waters it down. Cultural Bolshevism is literally penned by the Nazis. And I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional. With the Nazis, I tend to believe things were intentional because they had Goebbels and all their propaganda masters, right? And so while Hitler might have been a little bit more impressionable with his organic beliefs, people like Goebbels, total psychopaths, man. I would not put it past them to just sit down and write this stuff out like they're telling a story. And cultural Bolshevism is the idea. It's basically the JQ, the Jewish question. Why are all the Jews in power? Why are the Jews in control of the German banks and, the German media? Well, it must be that the communist Jews have subverted our society, and that's why we have economic despair. It has nothing to do with World War I or the Treaty of Versailles. No, it's the Jews that tore down our society.
Or the fact that the Germans started this insane hostility in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Backfired on that.
I have to brush myself up with a bit of the World War I history, but from what I understand, like they basically took cultural Bolshevism, and I don't know who picked it up, but they turned it into cultural Marxism, and then they sold it down. So anytime I hear someone say cultural Marxism, I immediately know to question that person. And Jordan Peterson loves cultural Marxism.
So there's a great phrase that one of my teachers told me maybe 10, 15 years ago. And she was telling me about her experience. She spent a lot of time in the 70s joining cults to learn what they knew and then jetting as soon as it got weird. And she, just to learn from them, just because sometimes they have knowledge, it's like, well, it's a bunch wacky, what can I say? I guess it was the 70s. I wasn't there, I wasn't born in the 70s. I guess people did this kind of thing for fun. But she used this phrase that she says is the rhetorical tactic for all cults, which is be good, love God, and you'll believe whatever the third thing I say is. Right. So you look at Jordan Peterson and it's like, what's that book? It's like I read this 12 Rules for Life, right? I read that whole book, and there's many, like, let's be honest, like there's many moving passages in there. He hooks you emotionally. There's all this
wonderful
stuff.
advice.
Yeah, there's great advice, like there's advice about taking responsibility. He talks about his personal struggles. He talks about his daughter's struggles with her bone issues, which are very, very moving. And then, of course, he throws in all these things from Disney movies, which people are already preconditioned to be hypnotized by because they've grown up with them, talking people directly to the level where they're still a 5-year-old, and Bible stories. He's getting people at this very, one of the things, if you study hypnosis, people often use Disney stories because they know that they can immediately regress somebody to a childlike state. I'm not saying I've read accounts of this. I've never seen anyone do it other than Jordan Peterson, but this is in the hypnotic literature, right? So
Stefan Molyneux does this as well. I don't mean to break your flow, but this is a common thing with people. Stefan Molyneux, well, what he'll do is he'll take Zootopia, for example, and I got in the habit of doing this, of where I would look at movies and I would try to decode the liberal ideology out of it. And so that's what they do. They spin a bunch of stories, and that's why they like to talk about the Matrix and the Red Pill. Or when they want to talk about mass immigration, they'll talk about the Lord of the Rings. And Mordor, the hordes are at the wall and they're coming to destroy, Gondor. They love that because it hooks you, and it's it's relevant to you.
And they're also speaking directly to the part of your brain that was conditioned with that deeply when you were 7. They're not using logic, right? They're going straight to your childhood conditioning. It's very, very sinister. And I'm surprised more people haven't picked up on that. Certainly, I didn't know about Molyneux, but I did notice that Jordan Peterson does that both in his book and on his YouTube videos. He goes for the Disney thing. But that aside, like you read that book and you're automatically primed. You're like, even I was reading this book, and I'm not a big fan of Jordan Peterson, obviously, but I was reading the book and I was very moved by it. I was like, there's great that, I was reading this book and I'm like, you know what, if I'd read this book when I was 26, 27, or just out of college, even, like, this book really would have helped me, right? There's a lot of lessons and information in there that I had to learn the hard way, that it would have been very helpful to learn from something like that. Now, that's but he takes you through. It's like, be good, love God, be upright, and then you'll believe whatever the third thing I say is. And then somewhere around page 170, it's, and P.S., your problems are not just your problems. They're created by the postmodern neo-Marxists that are infiltrating every level of society. Whoa, buddy. I just feel like somebody just keyed my car, like, what, you just threw something into the punch there. So
he basically just rebranded cultural Marxism.
Well, right. Yeah, I mean, it's and so, yeah.
Do you want to know do you know what his explanation is for it when people tell him it doesn't make sense?
Sure.
His explanation for why postmodern neo-Marxism doesn't make sense is that, well, of course it doesn't make sense. The SJWs are just out of their minds. They're insane, so they have contradictory ideas. Now, what? That is so deceptive, and like,
it's extremely deceptive because he's, cultural Marxism is not at all what has been said or proposed by people on the left. He's saying, it's obviously a straw man, that they've created cultural Marxism as this straw man. And then they say it doesn't make sense because their ideas don't make sense. Well, but it's not their idea. It's your idea. Right?
Yeah. Postmodernism and Marxism are contradictory to each other completely. Marxism is like a material, analysis of the world. And then postmodernism comes in and says, well, we can just break down the structures and define things how we want. Those are contradictory.
Right.
I don't know how he got that. I don't know where he came up with that.
Well, I think that it comes from the cultural Marxism theory, and it comes from this whole conspiracy theory about the Frankfurt School and all that. And it comes from, yes, you can see it in Pat Buchanan, but I don't, but you can take it all the way back, scarily enough, to the Nazis. And there was an individual named Alfred. Do you know who Alfred Rosenberg was?
No, we're going to have a private conversation after this, because you've got a lot of resources I need to learn about.
Sure. Well, just to mention, I think this is so important for people to see, just for context, right? It's crazy how, how much people have lost context for things now, mostly because of the algorithm, or they get trapped into tunnels. It didn't always used to be like that. 10, 15 years ago, even on the internet, people were consuming information from lots of disparate sources. People still had RSS readers. They were able to see opinions from all different sides. Journalism was still functioning properly. People were much better informed, and everything has just dissolved and has just largely become controlled by the algorithms. And there's no funding for real journalism to point out this thing, the context, the history of things. So Alfred Rosenberg is kind of like the proto Jordan Peterson. He was kind of like the official state philosopher of the Nazi Party. And I believe he's the one that he was, and I don't want to get this wrong, so you can check his Wikipedia, but he was very much arguing for this cultural Bolshevism theory, and basically making the same, pretty much the same arguments as Jordan Peterson is now, and because he was so loyal to the Reich, he was given a lot of responsibility under Hitler, and they ended up putting him in charge of a concentration camp. And then I believe he was hung by the Allies after during the Nuremberg trials. But if you look at his, I'm just looking at his Wikipedia right now because I want to get this right. It's not that different from a lot of the rhetorical strategies that people are using right now. So anyways, I'm kind of on a tangent here. I'm trying to find like a good passage to read to sum this up, but let's see. He spoke out about Jewish Marxism and how it was corroding German society from within. So it's almost this exact same.
So when he first ended, he came right out and said it. When he first wrote it down, it sounds like it's Jews. But then he was like, well, let's call it the Bolshevists. Let's blame it on the Bolshevists. That's so insidious. It's so insidious.
It's insidious. And to bring this back a bit, I think it's why it's so important to have conversations like this. Because I got to tell you, there's a lot of, there's a lot of things about this that I assumed would be common sense to people. For instance, if somebody is doing, these rhetorical strategies about, somehow, poor immigrants who are just trying to, eat are somehow undermining civilization, or that trans people are undermining civilization. It seemed to me that these would be obvious rhetorical strategies to people, and they would just dismiss them and they'd be immune to them. And shockingly enough, in my conversations with people out in the real world, so to speak, that's not the case. They're kind of like, what's the problem? Jordan Peterson's saying, just, stand up straight. What's the issue? And so, I think there's some work to do, because things that you think would be obvious, and even yourself, right? Like you talked about your own indoctrination process, and now it seems you've done some outside research, or you've gotten new perspective on it and reframed things. But, it's crazy that people don't have the defenses up for this. And one of the really scary things is, have you met anyone who was in the Holocaust?
No, I would love to. If you could ever get me a meeting with a Holocaust survivor, I wowould absolutely love to.
Okay, so I have, right? I've talked to people, I've seen people with tattoos on their arms, when I was in school, a Holocaust survivor came and spoke to us and talked about her experience and being on the trains and being in the camps, and how they had, she had to leave tons of it out because we were young, right? There was obviously such things of such momentous horror that she couldn't share them, but it was clear by implication how awful it was. And she said things like, we were on these trains getting shipped across Eastern Europe, and I can't tell you what we were eating. And I can't tell you what we were drinking. It's like the main thing I remember. Just my mind trying to wrap around that. Like, what is she talking about? Like something of such momentous horror, right? And the and the thing that always struck me so much when I interacted with people who had been through the Holocaust, and I've interacted, and by the way, not only with people who have been through the Holocaust, but I have many Jewish friends who are second generation who grew up in families where their parents had been through the Holocaust and had survived and did not talk about it, and they still carry the trauma. And it's any group that goes through genocide like that. You know, one of the things that we're realizing now with epigenetics is it doesn't just stop with the people who are killed or who survive. It's passed down. It goes, you know, the same trauma and anxiety go to the children. So, but one thing that always struck me was the burning need to communicate to people that this can't happen again. You know, it's like this, we can't allow this to happen again. And also the forgiveness. There was always this sense of compassion and forgiveness. And that, I mean, what can you even say about that? It's almost unimaginable. But one of the things that I believe I need to look her up. She died a few years ago, the woman that came to speak in our class. But one of the things she said, or that I believe another survivor said, is they asked her, you know, do you forgive the Nazis? And she said, yes, I absolutely forgive the Nazis. And said, how could you possibly, you know, we're talking about people who mechanistically tortured and annihilated, you know, everything you care, everything you love, all the people you love, you know, and she said, you know, I'm not forgiving them for them. I'm forgiving them for me. Right. Because I can't live with that hate. And I think that there's a powerful message. And, you know, obviously, I don't think that, you know, just attacking people, you know, calling people Nazis, calling people racist, you know, it's like, yes, those things are true. But, you know, one thing I think we need to understand in this country is how vulnerable people are. I mean, people are vulnerable from job loss. They're vulnerable from communities that have been ravaged by OxyContin, and there's rage and anger. And there are, in many cases, things that people have every reason to be enraged about. And rage can be a good thing. It can prompt you to action. It can make you ask new questions like, how can I step up and actually help my community? But the problem is that you know, and if you look at any great leader throughout history, that's usually, you know, the only difference I believe between somebody who's a great leader and somebody who becomes a great villain is that they may be confronted with the same things, but they ask themselves different questions about them, what's happening, why things are happening, and what they can do about it. And yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought, but
well, I like where you were going there. Is that like you know, first of all, the way I look at it when it comes to forgiving.
Just to wrap it up, one thing with that it's so what's happening right now is people are suffering in this country. They have been suffering since the economic crash, and before that, they've been suffering, particularly in the heartland, in a lot of the places in America that, quite frankly, a lot of the people on the coast have forgotten about. And West Virginia is a perfect example.
Yep.
Right? And people have lost, or Detroit, right? And it's not just white communities, it's across the board. And people have lost their jobs, you know, manufacturing jobs have gone, all the auto jobs went, the farming jobs went, you know, now it's all these huge farming consortiums like Monsanto and things like this have, you know, which ironically is owned by Bayer, who is responsible for producing Zyklon B gas in the Holocaust. But now they're producing our food. That's just an aside. But there are real real problems in this country. And of course, the pushing of OxyContin into and the heroin problem throughout so much of this country that people have fallen victim to. And, I agree that when you look at, for instance, in the 2016 election, when Hillary Clinton stood up and called people deplorables, my reaction was just, how dare you? How dare you? These are American people. It's like the job of a leader is not to dismiss people and say they're less than. It's like, now you may say their behavior is deplorable. That's understandable. The behavior is deplorable. But ultimately, the job of people, particularly somebody who's president, by definition, somebody who wants to be president should be looking after their constituents. And so the thing is that people are very vulnerable. I think they're going to become even more vulnerable as automation replaces jobs, particularly trucker jobs, which is the number one job in America. People don't have jobs. They're not going to be able to eat. And the scary thing is that groups like the alt-right are proliferating in this situation and giving people an easy option as somebody to blame, suddenly a sense of family, a sense of connection, just in the same way that, ISIS has in the wreckage of the Middle East, right? I think it's the same. And that's a very, very scary situation. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah. So the alt-right, this is just breeding ground for not just for cults in general, for any of these. They're all cults. ISIS is a cult. The alt-right's a cult. They are political in nature, but Scientology had political aspects to it as well. But yeah, so they play on their target demographic, and then they play on the issues that they're having. So yeah, so ISIS plays on it for Muslims, and they probably target their race and their ethnicity and talk about that. And they do the same thing the alt-right does, where they give you a sense of pride. They tell you you are a strong people that has a long history. And when you're hearing this and you're, working in a factory 40 hours a week, barely able to afford things, you have medical debt, everything around you falling apart. You hear people like Hillary Clinton, who are Democrats, who you would think of as liberals, calling you a deplorable. And then the alt-right comes in and starts saying things like, well, the opioid crisis, you're experiencing white death. They're killing you off, and they don't talk about it, and they don't help you. Michael Moore had if you watch I forget what it was, he was up on stage doing kind of a monologue show. He talked about that, like why people voted for Trump. And I feel like most people don't understand why people voted for Trump. Most people think white, rural, working class people voted for Trump because they're racist. And that might be true for some of them, maybe even many of them. But that is not the fundamental reason they voted for him. They voted for him because he came in and spoke to them when no one would. And he told them the things that they wanted to hear. And then afterwards, he did nothing to fulfill in those promises or actually help those people. But the alt-right, they're a lot more insidious than Trump, is that they say, well, come with us, brother. Trump might have left you behind, which now the alt-right has actually dumped Trump. They don't like Trump. They've picked up Andrew Yang now. And the alt-right, well, we can talk about that, and I can tell you why. Spencer, it came out of his own mouth.
Okay. Yes, tell me now, actually, because just to preface.
Yeah. So Spencer said
Yang has some great ideas, and I think that universal basic income is a necessity to keep this country together. So, but I've seen the alt-right has attached themselves to him. So what's happening there?
Yeah, so basically, to sum up the other point, the alt-right gives you a purpose and said that we are pushing forward, brother. You don't have to worry. We might not be winning now, but we are pushing towards a greater future, and we will win. And so the Andrew Yang thing, to go over on that, is so the alt-right, anyone watching, you have to take what they say with a grain of salt. They have no problem lying, but they are also, when you get down to the very bottom of the funnel and listen to the true alt-righters, the Jared Taylors, the JFs, well, not JFs, not so much, but especially Richard Spencer. They are surprisingly honest, and they strategize live on YouTube calls. And they talked about Andrew Yang, and Richard Spencer says, as a movement, we've taken a lot of heat for being too exclusive, for focusing on our white identity too much. And he said that I think it would be a good thing for us to embrace Yang. We could excuse my language, but I'm quoting Richard Spencer, we could wrap ourselves in the fortune cookie of Andrew Yang and use them as a vehicle to weather the storm forward. That's part of it. It's so basically that's them saying, well, how can you call us racist? We voted for the Chinese man. This is the ways that they constantly use minorities and other groups that they ultimately want to kill as a way to smokescreen.
When you say ultimately want to kill, can you speak about that specifically?
Well,
because that's something
you'll never hear it out of their.
I've seen they hide it on Discord and things like that, but their rhetorical strategy is very much to hide that. So I'd very much like your opinion on what the deal with that is.
It's hard to tell because they cloud themselves on irony. But what they will do is you will never hear that from Mike Enoch, JF, Eric Stryker. I don't mean to name drop these people, but it's good to know, be aware of who they are. You will never hear that come from their mouths. They denounced Charlottesville. They denounced the Christchurch shooting. They don't like these things because they're bad optics. And the alt-right is very pragmatic in their approaches to things and their tactics. But if you go to the comment sections on their YouTube videos that they make, if you go to the comment sections on Poll, or if you get, I never went into their Discord chats, but I'm assuming it's in there in much more detail. They have jokes about gassing the Jews. They make memes about hanging blacks. They make memes about basically eliminating all the people that they don't want. I've gotten this myself. I'm now at IDF plant by the Israeli government, and I'll be hung right next to Natalie, ContraPoints. So they very much will use the people that they see lower on the hierarchy to expand their message. And then if they ever get into power, they'll do the same thing the Nazis did.
Do you think there's
around them all
a video of that? I mean, like, what are we really talking about when we talk about the alt-right? Is it actually just, 50 parents' basement dwellers, or what actually is it in the real world? I think this is an important question to ask.
It's hard to tell because they're so crypto. But I think first of all, there are other basement dwellers, but they push the propaganda, they push the message. And then whenever you get into the real world, it's very clear that after Charlottesville, a lot of them revealed themselves. And we've also had movements like Identity Europa, which they made themselves a little too obvious with that one, right? And they have pushed political movements.
Branded as American patriots or something like that.
Well, that's the new fascism. And, their golden child now is Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson is like carving out their little third position and pushing this patriotic fascism. So they have political movements in the real world, and they pushed hard this past midterm to get their people into office. Most of them did not make it because they were exposed by the media, thank God. But Steve King, we got him, right? We got Steve King. So they do have political sway. And what the alt-right does is the alt-right realizes, they will tell you, yes, we don't have much power now. That's why don't go out there and use guns. Don't go out there and do that because the government will just stamp us out. They want to shift the conversation. They want to shift the Overton window to the right. And that's what they're constantly trying to do. And they do that.
This is a really, really important concept. And this is critical. And I've explained this to people, but I'd like to hear. This is another reason why people don't understand this strategy, which is why they're so vulnerable to, people who seem more palatable to the mainstream, right? So if you could explain this strategy, it'd be very helpful.
Yeah, well, I mean, just look at the way it manifests itself. I know conservatives. I have conservative friends that talk about things like cultural Marxism. I have conservative friends who discuss these things. And so now it's slowly getting planted in their brain. They're getting primed because all this is marketing. It's a business model. It's very insidious. It's very funny that a lot of these people are capitalists, but at the same time, they're pushing a marketing strategy. And so they'll use these terms, these diluted terms, to sort of red pill people in different issues. And they push their memes as hard as they can. They'll talk about, have you ever noticed that 13% of the people commit 50% of the crime in this country, referring to black people. And so they're constantly trying to use their message to get it into your head that, you should believe what we believe because this is the reality of the situation, shifting it to the right, shifting, everyone to the right. And Trump, the reason they love Trump so much and the reason they memed him so hard is because Trump massively shifted us to the right. He took the conservatives, and if you know any Trump supporters, I don't know if you do, I don't know where you live, but they have gone completely off the rails of what a normal conservative would have been 10, 15 years ago. And well, they've kind of they've gotten really hard into the immigration stuff. They've gotten really hard into preserving their culture. The Islamophobia has been fanned up a lot. And so, you're even starting to see like people like Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder are kind of shifting in this direction as well, although they're a lot more moderate than others.
So another thing that I, if I'm correct about the Overton window strategy and the whole, I've seen them talking about metapolitics and taking ideas from, left tactics, like all of the stuff used by, what was his name? Saul Alinsky in the 60s. Right. I've seen the European fascist groups talking about that quite a bit. But the other thing is, it's not just dropping things into the mainstream conversation. It's proposing ideas that are as extreme as possible so that the ideas that are filtering into the center seem tame by comparison.
Oh, yes. So if I may.
Dragging the window from the other side. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is a common marketing strategy that you'll do. The actual term draws a blank on me right now. But what you basically do is there's two ways that you can convince someone of something. You can spoon feed it to them over time, or you come out with a very bombastic statement that's obviously ridiculous that no one would believe. But you do that, and you do that on a semi-consistent basis. And then after a while, it makes the things that are a little less extreme seem more moderate. And so that's why there's like the Overton window is the idea that there's a center, but the center is arbitrary. It shifts. So but for some people, for some reason,
we got to argue. Like we see people being like very like, oh, well, both sides are extreme, or they're arguing from the center. Like you're getting pulled. You're getting what's called the center is being engineered for you. And that's why I think it's very important, where I'll always have debates with people online where they'll be like, oh, Jordan Peterson's not alt-right. Alt-right. Like technically, no, he's not, right? Technically. But I think that this is why people need to understand that there's a spectrum and there's these interlocking groups. And it's ultimately anything that is yanking you in that direction is just, the answer just has to be no. Well, why no? Let's talk about my ideas. No. Like, no, I'm not saying censorship, but it's just like the answer has to be no. It's like, well, what about free speech? Don't you want
Yes.
No, I don't want to hear it. I understand who you are. I see you. I know where you're coming from. No, those ideas are not conducive to us, growing as a species or helping anybody. It's just like, you're like, yeah, I understand your ideas. Yes, yes, you have free speech, but it's like, I don't want to hear it. It's like the answer is no, because as soon as the tendency, as you know, the tendency psychologically with people is as soon as they get into this thing of, oh, well, let's just have a debate. The automatically, debate is like negotiation, right? When you enter into a negotiation with somebody and you say, I think that I should pay $100 for this mahogany table. And they say, no, I think you should pay $200 for this mahogany table. Like automatically, you're going to end up at somewhere around $150 for the table, right? It's just a given. It's like you've entered the game. So the only way to win the game is just don't participate. It's like, no, I know what I believe. My ideas are correct. People should not be judged on the color of their skin. People should not be genocided. There should not be some type of hierarchy in society. Like all this is horseshit. We fought a war that more than 50 million people died in to prove that this is horseshit and to stamp it out. It's like, no, we've been over this. No, right?
But you seem, I don't know, but you're being kind of unreasonable. Maybe we should have the talk and like really kind of work out issue by issue and see where we really lie. People like to be in the center because it makes them feel like they're reasonable, right? And a Peter Coffin, a fellow
reasonable, by the way, that it's also the whole centrist argument. I just made this point on Twitter. I was fighting with somebody on Twitter before we did this, God forbid. And people say like, oh, well, we should be in the center and, see both sides. It's like, no, the center is a position of cowardice. What the center really is that you're scared and you want people to like you. You don't want to disagree with anyone and you want to be safe because you're in the crowd. It's like, well, by the way, how did the Holocaust happen? It wasn't just because of the agitators. It was because everyone in the center saying like, well, this is kind of, maybe this will end soon. Like, I don't want to rock the boat. That's why it happened.
Just to give a quick shout out, Peter Coffin, a fellow bread tuber. I don't know if I can call myself that yet. By the way,
what is bread tuber? I've seen you talking about.
So bread tuber. It's a kind of a communist joke that I believe Peter Coffin came up with. I think he came up with the term bread pill. It was a kind of a play on red pill, but it was basically like de-radicalizing people. But then at the same time, they have a lot of communist and leftist beliefs.
Wasn't bread pill meant Christianity originally, didn't it?
I don't know, but I just know it in the context of where Peter Coffin came up with it. He's a YouTuber. He makes great work, and he talks about the Overton window and fishhook theory, where the right will always kind of pull people in the center back over to the right, because that's just how because they're the ones that are going to say the bombastic messages and use the dirty tactics. But yeah, I don't know. People like to be in the center. And just as a little anecdote, so this experience for me has just skyrocketed out of control in a sense. And so I've been wanting desperately to play catch up. One of the things I had to do was quit my job to do this full time because there was just too much work to be done. And I know that this is going to be worth it. So I'm taking that risk, right? But
you're making YouTubes, or you have some type of
YouTube videos. Yeah, I have a lot of ideas on YouTube videos. I want to help de-radicalize people out of these movements. And I have a lot of resources and a lot of people behind me that want to push me. But, to not come off the wrong way, I don't want to ask my audience for money quite yet, because I've not given them any content that I think is worth anything. They loved my first video, but that's not enough. So I went out into the world, into my own social circles to look for funding. I was like, guys, I just need like $5,000 to get me some camera equipment, pay my rent for a month or two in the house, in the place I'm going to, and then I can really push this movement. I had not business contacts, but I had people in Charlottesville that were business owners in the community. I talked to liberals in my community. I talked to all these centrists, and I said, guys, I showed them the video. I gave them the pitch. I said, this is a movement that we have a lot of momentum behind. I have a team behind me of volunteers, and then there's other YouTubers and Twitch streamers and people that want to push this. I said, give me your support and I won't let you down. And what I got from all of them was, I don't want to get involved. I don't like to deal with controversy. I kind of just want to be, in the center. And I thought, and I'm literally telling you guys,
Holocaust happened.
Yeah, that's how the Holocaust
happened here. That's how it could happen here.
Yeah, and I pleaded them. I was like, guys, I was basically, I didn't consider myself this, but I was basically an ex-Nazi. I'm telling you from my own mouth how dangerous this is. Please help me fight this. I don't know. I just don't have the time. Maybe, yeah. And they just blew me off. Mm. And especially the woman in Charlottesville, it just totally dumbfounded me. I'm like, this was in your own community. And I had discussions with her. How that horrified her. That event horrified her. It shocked her. But even still, she was not willing to help because she said, I don't want to I said, we can donate anonymously, all that. No, I don't want to get involved with controversy.
Man, so this is really...
Leftists are the only people I know that are helping fight. It's all leftists that want to fight this. It's just like World War II. The communists are going to have to...
Communists, whatever people call them, it's crazy. Well, this is... and it's amazing how, so Goebbels, if you look at Goebbels, right, like I believe there's a Goebbels quote, and I may get this wrong, so please, look it up. But he said something like, there's a couple classic ones where he said, one of them is if you repeat something enough, people believe it becomes the truth, right? Which certainly the Republicans used in the Second Iraq War. But one of the other things that he said is, man, I'm blanking on it now. What the hell? Okay, I suddenly blanked on it. But I think the scary thing is the large majority of people. Oh, I remember. Sorry. It was that we will accuse our enemies of doing what we want to do to them. Right?
Yeah.
It was something like, And yeah, but like consciously, like Goebbels, extremely conscious, like consciously doing what he was doing. And that is what we see. I'm going to try and look this up because it's worth getting the right.
Yeah, while you're looking this up, I'll give you a little acronym, or I think it's an acronym, right? Gaslight, obstruct, project. These are the tactics these people use. I will let you figure out what that acronym. I'll let you figure that one out. And gaslight, obstruct, project.
Yes. And who coined this?
I don't know who coined it. I heard it from a friend on Discord, to be honest with you. And I thought it was quite clever. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly right.
I'm not sure I can find the actual quote, but it was something to that effect. It's, we will, oh wait, here, let's see. It's on Stack Exchange of all things. There's one from the NURM. So he's quoted publicly often as saying, accuse the other side of that which you are guilty. But the closest quote appears to be, the cleverest trick used in propaganda against Germany during the war was to accuse Germany of what our enemies themselves were doing, from the Nuremberg rally in 1934. So at least he's aware of this dynamic, and that's definitely what they did, right? And it was, it's exactly what the alt-right is doing, all the way from, you see Jordan Peterson saying all of a sudden, by the way, it's like, we got Trump into office. We got the worst president in U.S. history, somebody who's directly enacting authoritarian policies and targeting whole groups of people. And it's just a total betrayal of everything it means to be an American, let alone everything that we fought for in World War II and all, and it's just a total betrayal of the American spirit. And then what do we have? We have these professional rhetoricians like Jordan Peterson saying like, oh, no. Actually, the problem is leftist college students who want to be called by pronouns. And and it's like, what? No. The problem is and Jordan Peterson like, oh, college students who have blue hair are leading us to the gulag. And one thing that I think is very telling about Jordan Peterson is when it was revealed that infants were literally being put in concentration camps, migrant children at the border, and being put into camps across the country and separated from their parents. What did Jordan Peterson, who claims he studied extremism his whole life and is fighting the war against extremism, what did Jordan Peterson say about this? Nothing. And it was straight back to college students with blue hair who want to be called by pronouns are leading us to the gulag. This is classic misdirection, and it's a key, and we take this all the way down to the extreme alt-right, where they're saying, oh, white genocide, they're trying to replace us. Well, you're accusing them of what you want to do to them.
I actually have to push back against your terminology there. You said white genocide. That's not politically correct. The proper term is the Great Replacement. That's the term that they've now shifted to. So just to clear that up.
But meaning that white genocide is always the phrase that they have used. But then,
yeah, they were. Well, I remember when I was watching Steph, him and Lauren Southern were using white genocide, and I watched them change it to the Great Replacement. Once again, the rebranding of white supremacy to dilute the red pill to make it more palatable to the liberals. That's ultimately what they're doing. They're trying to pull the conservatives and the liberals onto their side.
Was this another Spencerism?
I don't know. Spencer did it, but Stefan and it's hard to tell sometimes where these things originate. But Stefan and Lauren were pushing that. Jordan Peterson, he is so deadly. And Jordan Peterson was a hard person for me to give up when I came back to the other side, because I was like, well, what's so wrong with him? What's so wrong with him? Because he has such a high power level. And just to use my own, kind of internet slang, he is like one of the final bosses in the fight, right? He has so many tools at his disposal. You can't really pin him down. I mean, you watch those, I know you watch his debates and his interviews. And besides from, who was the girl on the BBC? Not BBC, The Guardian, I think it was. She was excellent. She really knew how to take him down. But you get the Kathy Newman. Is that who?
Yeah.
He mopped the floor with her. Just rhetorically, he mopped the floor with her. And it was because she would try to say things. So you're saying that I think, I don't know if she said it, you're saying you're a Nazi, but she said something ridiculous like that. And he said, well, actually, no, you're taking me out of context. And I think we need to back up here. And if you'd actually listen to what I say, I think that we'd have a much better conversation. He always does this. Always does this.
And the lobsters, as I call them, do it as well. His followers do it as well. Anytime I criticize Peterson, either online or in the real world, they will immediately say, you're taking him out of context. Really? Actually, I think you are. I think you don't understand the full context of the things that he's saying. You don't understand the context of the history of the cultural Marxist conspiracy theory and how it links to the Nazis. You don't understand the context of, let's say, for instance, who funds Jordan Peterson. We see him always retweeting. Now, this is alleged. I don't know. But we always see him retweeting Koch brothers initiatives, and we see that he's cozied up to the Canadian and U.S. governments, that he's buddy-buddy with Donald Trump Jr. and is obviously trying to get his stuff enacted into public policy and has political ambitions, if not to actually be in office, then certainly to have the ear of the people in power, which he clearly does. And this is very, very sinister. And one thing that I always tell people is, prior to the Trump cycle, I don't know how much you paid attention to this, but prior to the Trump cycle, when I was working really, really heavily as an investigative journalist, there was so much pushback against corporate control in this country. There was Standing Rock, right? There, WikiLeaks, Snowden, there was a really frightening time for the people in power. And I think that what they actually did, I would not be surprised. I don't know for sure, but I would not be surprised if particularly a lot of these big oil concerns and potentially intelligence agencies, I don't know. I would not be surprised if they just engineered this alt-right thing as a distraction and as a way to siphon off that anger. I think that Jordan Peterson is the best thing that could have happened to them, because whether he was created intentionally or not, that he's siphoned off all of that anger into, clean your room. Which is the same game that COINTELPRO played with the counterculture in the 60s, where they said, oh no, don't protest, don't fight the powers that be, don't protest U.S. involvement in Vietnam, take psychedelics, meditate, get a guru, listen to Beatles albums, go internally. That's where you can fix the problems of the world, which is exactly what Jordan Peterson is doing with this whole clean your room thing. Anyways, so, and the other troubling thing about that is, whether you're aware of this or not, this is something that I'm sure Christian Piccolini can speak to quite a bit, is that it's very much a public record that in the original, or the white nationalist 1.0 movement, as they call it in the 80s, which resulted in Timothy McVeigh, which people seem to have completely forgotten about. I remember that happening. It was that when Timothy McVeigh blew up the Oklahoma City building, that was the biggest act of domestic terrorism ever prior to 9/11. And it was shocking. All these people were murdered. And during that time, I think after that, there's a good documentary about this on Netflix about the McVeigh and that time period. After that time period, a lot of the skinheads and the Nazis and people who were around William Pierce and people like that purposefully rebranded themselves and put on suits, and a lot of them became ghost skins and purposefully got jobs in law enforcement and potentially government, but certainly law enforcement and the military. Are you aware of this history at all? Yeah. So we saw, for instance, and Christian Piccolini showed this. This is quite terrifying. Around, I think 8 or 9 months ago, there was something the Department of Homeland Security or ICE. It's somewhere back on my Twitter feed, and it's on Christian Piccolini's Twitter feed. Published something where they put out a statement about the border security, and there was something that sounded exactly like the 14 words in there. The 14 words. I've
heard them. I actually heard them after the New Zealand shooting. He had them written on his gun, or we had the acronym for it.
So that was the original rallying cry of the first white, the first skinheads in the 80s. Not first, but that wave of them.
Same rallying cry with the Great Replacement, right? their main
it's
push.
all the same ideas, right? And then the other thing is there was something like I believe ICE put out a statement where they were asked like, oh, how many children or, how many migrants are in custody? How many children are in custody? And they said, we have 1,488 children in custody. Right.
Hey guys.
Yeah, exactly, right. So this whole, and a lot of this was reported on again by The Intercept and other sources after Trayvon Martin happened, and that whole, and the riots and all the tragedy around that. And a lot of this, and when we were having this big national debate about, why are all these young black men being stopped and shot by the police? It's a real thing, right? And, one of the things that people were pointing out and reminding people of is like, hey, like the whites, a lot of these white supremacists directly got into police jobs and military. And that's one of the reasons why when you see the alt-right conspiring and things like this online, and it just seems like basement dwellers, it actually is a lot more frightening than that because, we're talking about people in the military, we're talking about people potentially in police, and outside of, and I guess a broader question that I should ask also is, at least from your perspective, what is their end game? What is their goal? I mean, they talk about creating the white ethno state in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh,
crazy stuff.
Just like the ultimate. And just real quick, there's a really good song about the Dead Kennedys. I recently got back into my love for the Dead Kennedys, as you can imagine. And there's a really good song called I Fought the Law and I Won. And at the end, he says, I fought the law, or no, I am the law and I won, right? And so it's about the KKK, just like you said, infiltrating the police. So the ultimate goal, if we want to get past the pragmatics of electing maybe a Chinese man or the pragmatics of whatever their strategies are, if we want to just get to the end nitty gritty goal, the end game, it's to have a white ethno state. It's not really much more complicated than that. I can tell you why they believe that, why they want that, but that's just what it is. They want an ethno state, and then whatever financial system or whatever, they debate on that amongst each other. Eric Stryker is a socialist. Richard Spencer is a soc dem. Jean-Francois Jarapi, JF, he's a libertarian. They argue about that stuff just like any other political group does. But what they all agree on is they want a white ethno state. They want a homeland for their people.
Which is, of course, the fast track to genetic suicide and inbreeding. But
right. And but they're going to get this. The thought leaders will tell you, well, we will get this peacefully. We're going to give all the black people $100,000 and they're going to leave the country. All right, dude. Okay.
So what is Richard Spencer's deal, by the way? He strikes me as he strikes me as a rich kid. He strikes me as, very sociopathic, he seems truly without empathy. But what is his deal? Okay. And my big question also is, where did that guy come from? Because he just came out of nowhere, and it's was this guy groomed by some other white supremacist group? Was he, what is a Richard Spencer, and why does he constantly seem to get media attention? Why is he, he seems to be untouchable on Twitter. He never seems to go away. What's the deal with that guy?
Yeah. So, when I was in this movement, I did not consider myself alt-right, although anybody on the other side of the political spectrum would have saw it that way. I consider myself alt-light, which is basically focusing less on race, more on IQ and culture. People if you want a person that you can point to, I was basically Lauren Southern. I was the male version of Lauren Southern. And I looked up to Lauren Southern. I had quite an infatuation with Lauren. So Lauren, if you want to hit me up in the DM so I can de-radicalize you, please do. Yeah, I'm going to bread pill Lauren so she can come back from that other side. So the person I listened to the most was Jared Taylor. He was the one I took the most seriously. Richard just talked about the ethno state too much for me. I sympathized with an ethno state. I thought they had the right to do that. But anyway, to explain Richard Spencer, from what I know about him, he did kind of come out of nowhere. Now, he coined the term the alt-right with his website. this is why the term the alt-left is nonsense, because the alt-right is an actual term that he coined. That's his website. I think it was 2014, 2015 he made the website. He was writing on the website. I don't know if he was a contributor on the Daily Stormer or not. But I don't know too much about Richard's past. From what I can tell, from what I've heard, Richard kind of had a trouble getting a career started. And Richard's a very intelligent man. He reads a lot about history. And I think that he probably somehow picked up these ideas and then he kind of believed this idea. Richard believes what he says. Richard's a very honest person when he's not playing tactics, right? Now he'll lie, for tactics. Like he'll vote for someone like Yang. But if you get Richard in a room where he feels comfortable, he will tell you exactly what he believes. Because he believes it. But so I don't know too much about where Richard came from, but what I've heard is that Richard had trouble getting a career started and that this has kind of jettisoned him forward. You asked, how does he keep getting into the media? You'd probably know more about than I do. How'd Trump keep getting into the media? He was controversial. He was good for ratings. People tuned in to watch it. The media is just about making money from what I can tell. I'm very much into alternative media, but it seems like we don't have, you're right, journalism's failing. And when you start to get to these little outlets for journalism, they don't have proper journalism. So we're in a sad state of like how we get the news out there right now. I don't know who. Yeah, it's like you can't really trust the big outlets because they've kind of been corrupted by the money. But then you can't trust the small outlets because they don't have the resources and the expertise to actually do on the ground journalism. So.
Right. And it didn't always used to be like this. And one movie that I like to point people to is Spotlight. Are you aware of this movie?
No, I'm going to watch that.
So Spotlight is a movie that was done about, there was an investigative journalism team that broke the whistle on child sex abuse in the Catholic Church in Boston.
Oh, with Mark Ruffalo. I know what you're talking about.
And so that movie is really instructive to watch because what you see in that movie is they paid a team of, I believe, 4 or 5 journalists for a year to work on that story. And they just sat in a room and following up leads and going through files they worked on one story for a year. And so the outcome was, I think, a series of 2 or 3 articles, and it won the Pulitzer and it broke open the sexual abuse in the church in Boston, which, had not, was nobody knew what was going on or they weren't talking about it at least. And it's crazy to watch that because, I'm a journalist. I've worked in journalism for quite a while. I come from a journalistic family, and so I've seen the progression of journalism for many, many decades. And it's changed, and now it used to be newspapers were big buildings where journalists were on staff and they had the resources because their revenue model was classified ads, which has all been taken by Craigslist, and also doing ads in the newspapers, which has all been taken by, it became Google ads and things like that. But now Apple has blocked those on the iPhone. So they've cut off that revenue stream. But there was that people actually got their news from the newspaper. And so there was revenue to do things like pay journalists to actually do journalism. Who would think? Now, particularly since the Gawker era, what journalism has become in places like Vice and Gawker, and I work for Vice, and Vice is great, but just there is a model that affects the entire industry, is that journalism is so unprofitable because really what they're looking at is it's clicks driven. They just need the underlying business models. We just need people to click on the articles and then click on an ad, hopefully, with the understanding that it's probably going to be like, 0.5%, but 1% of the people who read the article might click an ad. So they need to get it's like you said with a funnel, they need to get a huge audience. And the way they do that is by publishing shocking headlines and things that's not new in journalism, but it's to such an extent and it's just not profitable to run stories. So, it has to be added up with lots and lots and lots and lots of content. So what these companies do is they get either interns or people just out of college who are making pennies, and they just sit them in a co-working space where there's 4 or 5, snarky college kids on laptops, and they have to churn out 10 or 11 pieces of content a day, and they're just reblogging things. And it's just, that's not all journalism, but by and large, the business model is failing and it's the fault of big tech companies, and particularly Facebook and Google, honestly. And
it's their fault in terms of how how the digital advertising is just kind of
taken over the
everything.
Advertising.
Well, I wanted to get out of blue collar work, and I was pursuing digital marketing. That's how I came up with the idea of the funnel for the alt right. I'm glad this happened, because I kept thinking about it. I was like, dude, it's such a crappy job. Like, you just have to sit there and pump out this cheap content that it's garbage.
Society, and one of the, if you look at American history, the great bulwarks against fascism have been functioning journalism, a functioning middle class, and honestly, the church, right? Really functioning religion. Now, we don't have functioning religion by and large at all anymore, right? That's all God. And and whether, I'm not saying people should believe one thing or another, but what I am saying is, and there are many things, obviously, we just talked about childhood sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. I mean, there are many things wrong, don't get me started with organized religion. But the reality is that when people lose that sense of common shared place, when they, just like you did, when they lose that common bond with other people in the real world, and the sense that other people care about them and they care about other people, it gets very dark very quick. And just going to Starbucks to hang out, just maybe work next to people on your laptop does not replace that. I'm sorry, right? So, and the internet does not replace it. It pathologizes it. So, as you know, right? So that's gone. The, journalism is gone, and the middle class is gone. It used to be when there was a functioning middle class, when people had the ability, well, let me just put it this way. If you had been through college and it was clear to you that you, just like it was in the 70s, that you could put a down payment on a house right after school, that you could afford that you could marry your high school sweetheart, that you could have a job, you could even, let's say, a trade job, right? I mean, this was the case in the 70s when it was still unionized. You could get a trade job and afford all these things right out of college, or even with a high school education. If you had had all that, if you had had the ability to build that, would you have, how vulnerable would you have been to these ideas, right? So it's a real question.
You can always fall into these ideas, right? There's normal family men that became Scientologists, but I think you're exactly right. Whenever the sense of nihilism and dread that my generation has, both because of the financial crisis and the Iraq wars, we grew up thinking, well, nothing's possible. At the same time, we have a lot of optimism, but there's always this nihilism in the back of our heads. And I speak to a lot of people in my generation, they have this. And that's what these people play on. And so, yeah, if I had had that vision for the future and that promise of a future, yeah, I might have held on. I might have pushed harder. I don't know. But it's like when you're pushing into the dark, you don't want to go too fast. Like,
yeah, well, go ahead.
Would you want to talk about real quickly about the occultism that's going on within the alt-right? I can fill you in on that real fast.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Let me before we get there, I want to because I'm going to lose the thread I'm going to forget if we go forward. But yes, let's definitely talk about that. But one thing, what I want to kind of drop to the core of this a little bit, just in speaking to you, it seems like the vulnerability points for you were a sense of isolation, a sense of not belonging, both from your upbringing, from the sense of not having family, and then of being in an isolated place when after leaving school, right? So it seems to me that the keys for you were isolation. It's like these are the keys for it's like, let me just say what you were looking for, what was being offered to you was a sense of family, a sense of being connected to other people, a sense of belonging, a sense of mattering, a sense of saying like, hey, just because of the color of your skin, you're one of us and you have a family and it speaks to your identity and your background and all of this and
your history. You go back, you come from a long line of, heroes and yeah.
So is that an accurate?
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Mm-hmm.
So,
You couldn't put it any better.
So then the real question is, how can we offer that in a real way for people that is not destructive? Because honestly, so many people in this country, and not just young people, people from every generation are in states of isolation. Social media has made them more isolated than ever. Loneliness. People in this country are in a state of chaos and confusion and panic because they don't even know what's going on anymore. The world has become so confusing. And so many support structures that used to exist have fallen apart. And it's just going to get worse, to be honest, because of automation and job loss. And so the real question is, how can we provide a sense of community and connection and belonging and love that's real, and is supportive and that actually nurtures the best in people? I don't have the answer to that necessarily, but it's an open question. And I guess my question, you think that's the right question we should be asking?
Yes. So I have theory on it. So first of all, you could do it through religion, but religion's gone. We're just, people are, science took over. And so people don't believe into that anymore. I tried very hard when I was in the movement to believe in God, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it because I just know too much information that I was taught to in school. So religion could do it, but it's gone. I'm going to go partisan with it because it's the only way I see it happening. To any of the bipartisans in the room or the conservatives in the room, I'm sorry, but we have to push left. On the left, and to the alt-righters in the room or whoever that's on the right, you get told that the SJWs with the blue hair are going to come and take you away and put you in the gulag, and they hate you, and the transsexuals and the gays are going to destroy your society. I've been met, and even before I came out publicly like this and got put on this platform, I was met with nothing but love on the left that I had never experienced before in my entire life. On the right, all I was beaten down, degraded, made fun of by even my own friends. And they always said, well, it's just jokes, toughen up, be a man, right?
What do you mean by that specifically? What was happening?
Well, I'm in male circles, right? So, and I'm in gamer circles, so maybe they're a little bit more harsh with their rhetoric, but you can't talk about your feelings. You can't talk about what you're going through. You can't discuss any of that. You need to just toughen up, snowflake. You need to drop the bullshit. Your emotions, they don't matter. Facts don't care about your feelings. Those kinds of memes. And so when I came over to the left, I expected, when I made that video, I thought, well, they're going to eat me because that's what I've been taught that the left does. I still had that in my mind, even though I'd become de-radicalized and moved to the left. I still thought they're going to destroy me. And there's been skepticism. There has been people that think my tactics are not the tactics that we should be using. But there has been nothing but camaraderie and love. And it finally, I know it's just people online, but I'm actually developing real relationships with people now that I'll know I'll have forever. And it's absolutely amazing. And I never got that on the right, even with my closest of friends. So to all the alt-righters and the conservatives, just give it a try, guys. Just come over and you can reach out to me on Twitter and I will talk to you and we can just have a dialogue about it. You have to push left.
And just to interject, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be pushing left, right? Like I would say, like maybe just leaving that extreme circle and meeting people in the real world, because there's lots of good people who are just, conservative. Yes. So
what I get the sense of, though, that I never, I probably just have a small sample size to go from. So I'll drop that rhetoric there. But when I pushed left myself, I found a whole lot of camaraderie. And, I talked about earlier how my conservative and liberal contacts in society, they did not want to help me with this issue. But everybody that was on the left, they have just given me every resource available to them. Can I work for free? What do you need? And I'm like, I'll pay you back. Don't worry. No, don't worry about that, man. No. We have a common goal here. There was like a sense of common, unity that the right, I always talked about, but then I didn't experience it till I came over to the other side. So I don't mean to be partisan. I don't mean to say that you all have to be communist or for Bernie Sanders, but there was a culture that I saw when I went to the other side that I'd never seen before, that I was terrified of, and it was not the reality. It was just nothing but love. And even before, it's not the public platform. Even before I went on the public platform, I was getting this love from that side.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I will point out that, it's interesting how, not everyone on the left per se is like a communist or an anarchist or something like that. Things have gotten so extremist and polarized all of a sudden. Like most people, and this is why I raised the point about just standard American conservatives. It's like most people are just good people, right? And they just want to help. So it doesn't necessarily, I don't think it even needs to be something about going to another extreme, because, something just to be aware of for yourself as well.
Yeah, don't jump out of one rabbit hole and jump into another, guys.
It's very common. It's very common, even for people leaving cults, to just, to go just swing really far in the other direction. And I think also particularly, which leads us into what we were going to talk about, the conspiracy culture as well. Like there used to be so many blogs and platforms online where people were just talking about conspiracy or esoteric ideas. And it was wacky, it was crazy, but it's like, okay, like people are doing their thing. And, in some cases, there's good information. But once this cancer started metastasizing, so many of them just immediately went pure alt-right, a shocking number of them. Red Ice Radio is a good example of that. And several others. But let's talk about the occult thing, because the thing that people have heard about obviously is meme magic, but obviously there's a lot more to it than that, a lot more, right? And one of the reasons that I started watching this so closely is because I have that background. It's like I have some context on that. When I was involved in occult circles in the 90s and the early 2000s, there was kind of this little slight, proto-fascist thing going on way in the corner of like people who listen to Death in June, or I don't even know if you remember Death in June or what. Yeah. So it's before your time, but there was a little bit of this, but now, so that was always kind of there, but way on the fringes. And the occult world is already about as fringe as it gets, particularly at that time. It's become more mainstream sense. But at the time, the occult was at the fringe of the fringe of the fringe of the fringe. And then there was this weird kind of like slight Nazi occult thing that was like way off in the horizon, even from that point. And it was like so fringe that it was like, 3 people or something like that. So, but talk about where is this at now, and what is your take on it?
Well, it sounds like, honestly, I thought I was going to be giving you information with the meme magic, but it sounds like you probably know more about this than I do. So with what's going on right now that I've seen is there's these memes, right? And to anybody that doesn't know what a meme is, it's just a condensed idea. And then typically on the internet, it gets put into a picture. Now, a meme was coined by Richard Dawkins, so it could be anything. Everything's a meme. So in my culture, we just call everything a meme. You want to talk about some communism memes or some capitalist memes. But the memes that the alt-right was using, they were sharing a lot of Pepe, which is the frog. They were sharing a lot of this stuff. Now, the frog's really interesting. So first, they picked up Pepe just organically from the cartoonist, because Pepe, there was a cartoon where he's peeing into a toilet, and he has his pants all the way down on the floor. It's a little silly, guys, and the guy walks in, he's like, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Feels good, man." And so it was just this funny little quippy cartoon, and he was a character in the cartoon. The alt-right, for some reason, picked it up. And then they started doing like "Feels bad, man." And they did all these memes. And next thing you know, you got Pepe's in a Hitler outfit. Pepe's in a KKK robe. Pepe's got a MAGA hat on doing the OK sign. They're going to cut that up and put that out there. And that's what. But so Pepe was their central figure. They were sharing the hell out of him, and they were using him to push their message, right? But then someone on 4chan, as they always do when digging, and what they found was something quite, for anyone that has a conspiratorial mindset, is quite disturbing, is that they found this ancient god Kek. And Kek, K-E-K, the reason they found it had something to do with World of Warcraft, where if you would type LOL, it would say K-E-K. And so it was kind of interjected into gamer culture. And so they took that and they were like, wow, this frog, this ancient frog is named Kek. and he's the same frog that we've been sharing, and he's the Egyptian god of chaos. And they thought, wow, we have manifested the spirit of Kek into reality. And then so they were memeing that up and talking about how they were all Kekistanis and they worship Kek. And then someone else found another connection, and it goes back to this Italian album, this pop album, I believe from the 80s called, and on the track, one of the tracks is Chatelet. And on the album cover, there is a frog. And on the bottom of the album cover, it says P-E-P-E, Pepe. And if you listen to the lyrics, the translated lyrics, they're very esoteric. They're very weird. They very much talk about opening up a rift in the universe and stepping into an alternate dimension where anything is possible. And so once the 4chan got a hold of that, they connected the Kek from the ancient god. They connected the meme magic from Chatelet. And they said, that's it, guys. We found it. We brought back Kek. He's been talking to us all this time throughout history. And this is our point. And so then they believed that they were basically, and it's a joke for many. It's ironic for many, but some of them truly believe it, that they had found a form of occult magic that they were now using to get Donald Trump elected. And then when Donald Trump got elected, against all odds, they truly believed that they had created a rift in the universe and had stepped into another dimension. And they'll back it up by things like, well, the Bernstein Bears. What do you remember when you were a kid? Was it Berenstein or Bernstein or whatever? That's a side note. But they talk about how you had truly stepped into this other dimension and that their meme magic had got them there. And it's, to ramble on a little bit more, it goes straight back to the Nazis with their occultic beliefs, right? It's that the Nazis believed that they could harness the dark arts and basically shape reality into whatever they wanted. Heinrich Himmler, he hung the black sun. I need to learn a little bit more about the black sun, but it was an occultic symbol. Mm-hmm. And he hung the black sun in one of his castles. And the alt-right loves the black sun. I believe that the New Zealand shooter had a patch of the black sun on one of his bags. They put it into their online videos called Fash Wave. They'll put a vaporwave black sun in the background. They're very much worshipers of power and dark magic.
Yeah. So as somebody spent, altogether too much time researching this type of thing. So the world of the occult, there are lots of different schools of occultism, and to broadly oversimplify, there's a left and right in the occult world as well. The left, to oversimplify, we could say that the left wing is concerned with liberating everyone, right? And we see this.
The New Age?
Well, that's
like the Age of Aquarius kind of thing?
Yes, the New Age is kind of a watered down, hollow meme in its own right, in a sense. But, when we think about things like esoteric Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, or phrases, even like Crowley's phrase, every man and woman is a star, and the idea that, yes, Age of Aquarius, or everyone should be enlightened and everyone should be free. That's the left of the occult. It's kind of, and which is where I fall, certainly, which is that everyone should be liberated and free, and attained of peace, freedom, and happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and attain peace, freedom, and happiness. What that really means is that even going back to the Buddha, the whole goal of the Buddha 500 years before Christ was, look, like everyone, if you just meditate long enough to realize that your suffering is a delusion and wake up, and then we can be free of all this suffering. And that's kind of the whole goal, and has been. Now, on the right wing of the occult, which has been very hidden for a long time, up until now, my view of it is it kind of decloaked out of nowhere in the last few years. The right wing of the occult is all about hierarchy. It's only certain people should have this understanding of reality, and that everyone else should serve them, almost like a feudal society, which is a terrible idea. My take on it is there has always been this fascist occult thing. And yes, the Nazis absolutely, and Himmler, and all this was definitely going on. Even Nietzsche in some senses, but not all senses, and Crowley in some senses, but not all senses. This idea that that there could be this elite of people ruling over the whole. You're right, exactly. And it's total edgelordy. It's edgelord nonsense, right? But and it basically was defeated in World War II. There was next to no remnant of it. And when I mentioned bands like Death in June and things like that, there were little people like ironically at the sides, like, playing with some of that ideology, which was, obnoxious and dangerous at the time. But suddenly in the last 2 years, this whole school has decloaked as like sometimes called radical traditionalism and things like this. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, that was out of nowhere. It's like it was just regenerating for 70 years or something after World War II. Then out of nowhere, it just popped its head back up and nobody had any defenses against it because they hadn't encountered it within their lifetime. And which puts people like me in an interesting situation where we understand it and we know what it is because of the occult background. And my broad take, well, a couple takes. One is, people tapped into something ironically that is very real. And I don't think people, the whole alt-right, we can see it again as like a demon that has been summoned, right? That demon was there already, right? It was fed by the Nazis.
You know what I like to think about it like? I think of it, to take their tactics. I like to think of it like Harry Potter. They defeated Voldemort and the Death Eaters, right? But they didn't kill them completely. And all it took was a little bit of magic to bring it back. And that's exactly what they've done.
The other thing is Dugan. You're I'm sure aware of Dugan, right?
No, who's Dugan?
So Dugan is probably who's funding Richard Spencer, and he's the person.
Can you say that? How do you spell his last name?
Eugin. Alexander Dugin. So Dugan. Yeah. So Dugin, this is really, I'm surprised people haven't figured this out more. So Alexander Dugin is a political advisor to Putin. And he has...
Oh, the connection with his wife. I've heard about this a little bit.
Yes. Spencer's wife, right? It was a translator for Dugin or something like that. And so Dugin is an occultist, and he wrote a book called The Fourth Political Theory, where he says that there should be a new, it would basically Putin, after the fall of communism, Putin, in Putin's Russia, he's been casting around for a new ideology to unify Russia. And what they hit upon was traditionalism and these old Nazi ideas. It's not really, they call it National Bolshevism. There's things from the left and the right.
Nazbol. Yeah, they have meme pages that are quite terrifying meme pages.
There you go. So Dugin's whole thing is basically they've reconstructed the Russian Orthodox Church as some new type of national identity for Russia in the way and in opposition to American capitalism. And so one of the things is if you watch I don't know if you watch Russian television at all.
I think I know where you're going with this. I think I've seen the pictures.
Well, I don't know about the picture, but they've run ads of there's a famous ad that was on Russian television of there's just a normal working guy at home. And then all of a sudden his son turns into a trans person and everyone, there's immigrants living in his room. And it's like all this alt-right stuff. So it's basically the idea in Russia is, America is going to undermine tradition and turn everyone gay. And it's all the same arguments that the alt-right make. But so Dugin has constructed this. And the other thing about Dugin is he's not a lightweight. It was Dugin's planning that went into the annexation of Crimea, right? So he uses the Chaos Star, which is a symbol from the left of the occult, and from Chaos Magic, which is a tragic misappropriation. And so Dugin has this whole occult theology of hastening conflict with the West and, that Russia will essentially be the leader on the world stage, and not the leader, not just of, it's the same tactics they used in the 60s, but just from the right instead of the left, that Russia will be the leader of the global dispossessed. And the thing, so it's interesting, there's this whole Mueller thing that just happens. It's interesting we're having this conversation. The Mueller investigation didn't turn up any evidence of collusion with Trump and things like this, and people working out the details. And people have just gotten sick of CNN running, constantly hitting which the alt-right plays on as well, hitting the trope of, there's Russians everywhere. But the reality is we know, like, whatever Trump's involvement is, Dugin's strategy is to go in and amp up to back radical groups. And so one of the ways that they keep control in Russia, there's an amazing documentary I recommend. It's probably free online. I recommend watching, called Hypernormalization by Adam Curtis, that talks about this strategy in Russia, but I don't think talks about Dugin at all. Where their strategy for social control in Russia under Putin, which somebody else came up with, not Dugin, is, they understand that there's going to be protest against Putin, right? He's a draconian ruler, and just societies have radical groups as a normal, healthy function, right? There are dissidents within any society. So their strategy that they hit on was, instead of suppressing the dissident groups, which just proves their point and gives them credence and makes them martyrs, they'll just create a bunch of dissident groups so that nobody knows what's going on. So in Russia, they have something like 150 radical groups, most of which are created by the Russian government, and they're all contradictory. And so they've created this chaos similar to when you go on the internet and you don't know what's true because you've got all these YouTubes coming at you from all these different directions. And they figured out that now they've decided to start doing this in other countries, where what they were doing during the election is they were making all these Facebook pages of almost absurdly radical groups and actually creating flash mobs through Facebook, getting people to actually show up. And they very clearly funded the alt-right through Dugin, or propped it up. And so they're like, and Dugin's strategy is just like, look, just cause chaos, right? We'll prop up all the dissident groups, we'll prop up radical groups on the left, radical groups on the right, the alt-right, black separatist groups, like all these groups, right? Hundreds of them, and we'll create them through Facebook and run Facebook ads. And that's real, that's what they were actually doing. And they were radicalizing people on the alt-right. And Spencer very likely is a Duginist plant, possibly, but I would say likely. There's maybe other stuff going on there too. So there's, we are definitely living in an occult psyop engineered by, a Russian occultist. It's like that's the thing, right? People like go crazy about like, Russians, Trump colluded with Russia. It's like, it's way worse than that. It's way worse than that.
I mean, he got his little Trump Tower going on, but that's not the type of collusion that I'm expecting to see. And now that you've brought that up, I knew that they were meddling with the elections through the Facebook ads. But yeah, that's, by the way, to look about Alexander Dugin, I have seen him one time in an interview. It was with Lauren Southern. I couldn't bear to listen to him because he was just so boring. But he does have very clear connections with him. And you know what? It's interesting. It's almost like now they do have magic powers, right? With the Facebook marketing. It almost is a type of sorcery, right? They hypnotize you. It's a sort of like illusion magic that they use on people, and they get their will in the world through that. And it's really freaking sinister.
So how do we break the illusion?
Well, there's two ways to do it, right? Unless we're going to just dissolve into World War III, which I don't want to see that. There's two ways to do it. You either go after the platforms and you hit their bottom line. You create a national movement and you hit YouTube and Google hard enough that they back off. And they deplatform at least the radicals, at least the Molyneux.
Does that mean just kick people off the, demonetize?
Yes, deplatform, just like they did Alex Jones.
Okay.
You have that approach. They don't want to do that, I would imagine, because of the scrutiny and the bottom line. So you have to make the pain tolerance of keeping them on greater than the pain tolerance of kicking them off.
Right.
The other way we do it is the thing
what is your response to people who say, well, that's maybe, if certain, even if we don't agree with them, like if private companies are cutting out people's free speech, where does, is that a slippery slope? Where does that end? What determines hate speech and free speech? Should private companies have the ability to do that? What is your argument to that?
From my layman's point of view, you can make a slippery slope argument with anything. So you have to look at like the pragmatics of it. Do I want to change the Second Amendment or the First Amendment in this country? Not exactly. I'm open to a debate on that, but for now, I'm fine with it. But as far as these platforms, they have a responsibility. When you run a Twitch stream, you have a chat running on the side. And it's your responsibility to make sure that there aren't trolls and people in there saying racist things, people in there lying, spreading propaganda. It's your responsibility on that platform. When I have my YouTube channel, it's my responsibility to platform people that aren't going to come on and lie. It's the same responsibility the journalists used to have, right? They had a responsibility and ethical framework to platform responsibly. YouTube and Google have the same responsibility. I know they don't see themselves in this way, but they are news channels, the big giant news channels, and they have to take ethical responsibility. That's my opinion on that. Now, the other strategy that we do to influence this is we have to, I don't even want to call it magic because I don't want to devolve down to that level, but us bread tubers, we have to come together and we have to put out content and saturate the algorithm and kind of fight back that demon with our own sort of pacifying magic, by just pumping out content that's way better, way more interesting. And our content is way better and way more interesting. I would much rather watch ContraPoints do a theatrical, presentation, or Peter Copton do Peter Coffin do all different types of styles on his show than I would Sargon sit in front of a screen with an avatar for an hour and a half and just talk about SJWs and Anita Sarkeesian for 30 videos in a row.
Lord have mercy.
I mean, how did I buy into that crap? I don't even know. When I got over to
there's an element of this where it's like they just created so much content that it just swarmed the platform.
Yes. And so and this is what the alt-right does. JF, for example, JF pumps out content every night. He streams for probably 6, 7, 8 hours. He's a real trooper. And they know how to work the algorithm. They're constantly on each other's shows, putting things in the keywords.
Oh, so is that's why those videos pop up in people's feeds. Okay.
My video's been popping up in people's feeds, which I'm quite surprised of. But the reason is because it just cross-pollinated with the other videos. And I imagine it's because my video had tags that are just so unique, right? So you have to fight back by pumping out content. Our content is harder to pump out because it's usually a lot more entertaining. We need to do more live streams. We need to do more stuff like that so you can have quicker content because they do very easy content. The alt-right, they pump out hours and hours.
I agree. I think that's I would like to start doing more live streams. I mean, I do a podcast, but I'll work for 2 weeks trying to get the audio perfect. And I think there is something to be learned there where it's no, it's just swarm content out because at least my experience consuming YouTube, and I'm in my late 30s, but it's my experience consuming YouTube is just I just have it on. It's I'm eating,
yes,
or I'm
it's comforting
or something like that. I'm just okay, what's on YouTube? It's just okay, what's on TV? Just click something. And then it's people have made the observations you click one Joe Rogan video and the next thing, and I love Rogan's show. But the algorithm starts feeding you, and then it's Jordan Peterson, and then it's you like anti-SJW stuff, and the next thing you know, you're watching Jared Taylor videos or something,
Yeah. There's the joke in my circles that you can put on a Minecraft video or an Apex Legends tutorial, and then you fall asleep, and by the time you wake up, Stefan Molyneux screaming about how the white people are being replaced, and you wake up at 3 a.m. in this disoriented state. How did this happen? How did we get here? And it's just because, the Pewdie Pipeline by Non-Compete, American Johnson, you all need to go check that out. And he explains exactly this. I'm going to make a video about this. And then if you want a more technical analysis of it, please go check out, I think it's Becca Lewis. I don't want to get her last name wrong. Becca Lewis, I believe, over at Alternative Influence. And, that's the paper she did, Alternative Influence, about how these figures cross-pollinate on the platform and game the algorithm. Now, here's the issue. Us as bread tubers and leftists, we have to engage with their content to break through this iron. I like to think of it as an iron curtain of content, because there has to be crossover, right? For the algorithm to interject you into their right-wing reactionary content. And so this is why Destiny, he gets so much crap for this. But Stephen Bennell, Destiny, the Twitch streamer he has a YouTube channel. he did that. He debated. That's what brought me over. He debated Lauren Southern. He debated Nick Fuentes. These are all young millennial alt-lighters and alt-writers. And he debated them. And then that brought him into the algorithm. And then from there, he had conversations with ContraPoints. And that brought ContraPoints into the algorithm. And then once you got past that, you were fully past the Iron Curtain, and you could see, and it was amazing to me. It was like the Iron Curtain peeled back, and behind there was all these YouTubers that I'd never seen before in my life, and their content was amazing.
Interesting.
Bomber Guy, Philosophy Tube, Non-Compete, Sarah K or Sarah Z, Lindsay Ellis. I'm trying to name as many as I can, but yeah, there was just so many YouTubers that were on the other side producing wonderful content.
This is great. I think
Sam Cedar was another one. Sam Cedar was another.
I think you have an understanding of it, maybe because you're younger, you're more native to it. It's like you have an understanding of the algorithm. I hadn't really thought about that before. I didn't really understand. I actually had never thought about engineering the YouTube algorithm, but it makes perfect sense what you're saying. And I think that, the broader conversation, like here's my basic feeling, right? The alt-right's not going away anytime soon. If anything, they're becoming, as we saw from the Christchurch shooting, we would hope that things like the Christchurch shooting and then prior the death of Heather Heyer at Charlottesville would wake people up, right? To what, it's not a game, right? And by the way, it's not like, to people on the alt-right who may be watching this who are just like, their consumption of these ideas is limited to watching YouTubes and being in gamer forums. It's what you have to understand also is you're on the precipice of a very real world, right? There is a very real organized white supremacist world in America that is, for instance, Aryan nations in prison gangs in prisons throughout the U.S., organized Odinist white supremacists. The thing we talked about, law enforcement, separatist groups in the Pacific Northwest, the remainders of whatever William Pierce created, all this stuff is there. And that's not a place you want to be, like that's not a happy, that's like a very scary, very terrifying world. It'd be similar to, I don't know, getting inducted into ISIS, basically, right? One day you're playing Fortnite, like next thing you know, you have a bag over your head and you're being like, horrifyingly initiated into ISIS. You have to like double tap somebody to get into ISIS or some horrifying thing like that. So it's not a game, right? And the one of the things that the alt-right has been able to do is turn it into a game, or seemingly, where it's like they've used all these, PewDiePie or video game imagery or synthwave imagery, and all of a sudden it's like, or what the Daily Stormer does with cartoons and things, that all of a sudden it's like, ooh, like, but this is not a game.
To appeal to children.
It's horrifying, right? So
it's horrifying.
Yeah. And so I think that your point about, so to back up, I don't think the alt-right is going anywhere, unfortunately. It's a little entrenched at this point. I don't think that, and we see these far-right movements taking off in Europe. I don't think that, I'm sure there will be some type of public debate about whether these, I'm sure the, debate about, Facebook, Google, Twitter, and so on, censoring content will come to some head within the next few years. But who knows what form that will take? I'm sure it will be a halfway measure. I'm not sure I know the answer to that situation, because I can see on both sides, like, well, the whole, censorship of political speech versus, having total psychopaths access to all the minds of all the children of America, that's, but these are why, these debates have been fought over and over again at the level of public policy, but not necessarily in private companies. But anyways, one way or another, that debate will come to a head within the next few years. But there's going to be a long time between now and then, and who knows what the outcome of that will be. So I think that what you said, which is content swarming better content and just proposing a better worldview, and something that actually helps people, is probably the way to go.
Yeah. So, I just want to throw out a couple points. Like, first of all, we can't lose our integrity. We can't degrade our message. We can't stoop to their level whenever we're putting out our content. We don't want to brainwash, maybe we can make appeals to emotions in our videos, but we don't want to brainwash people from one rabbit hole into another. That's not right. That's not fair. And it's not going to create the kind of people that we want associated with as allies. We want to get people out of this occultic nonsense. I think that you asked me, well, what do we do about this? What is this? What's the actual issue here? This is a public health crisis. This isn't a political movement. This isn't really even a cult. Those are ways to talk about this, but it is a public health crisis in the same way that ISIS recruits. They prey on people that are isolated, mentally ill, that don't have an identity, and they offer something to you in the opposite way that Jesus Christ acted, right? Jesus Christ said, I will give you grace. I will give you the kingdom of heaven, and you can have it for free. Whereas they tell you can have all the things in the world. You can be in charge of the kingdom of heaven. You can be at the top of the hierarchy, but you have to give me your identity. And so we need to have a focus on mental health. It's the reason we have the school shooters. It's the reason we have, the ISIS recruiting. It's the reason we have people doing heroin and drugs. It's the reason people are consuming bad content. It's because there is a issue of isolation and alienation in our society. We have to deal with that. And the only way we deal with that is my message, my mission, love and empathy, and giving these people a safe space to come into and a community to belong. So that's what I believe.
Have you ever heard the song Pictures of Adolf by Bill Fay? It's from the 70s. It's before both of our time, actually. But I recommend looking it up. There's a line in there that's Christ or Hitler. That's the choice sooner or later you're going to have to make, right? Oh. And it's true, right? It's like, well, what are the lines? It's like, okay, so in the papers, on the TV screens, pictures of Adolf again, or on YouTube, on Twitter, on 4chan, pictures of Adolf again. As sure as I sit here, there will appear pictures of Adolf again. It's 1971. You're wrong. You're wrong. Throw down your cards. You're wrong. If you say Adolf, he won't come. Okay, deny representation by leaders of all nations. Have you really got anyone to replace them? Christ or Hitler, Christ or Vorster, who was I believe, an apartheid supporting politician in South Africa, if I remember correctly. So Christ or Hitler, Christ or Vorster, Christ or all the Caesars to come. That's the choice sooner or later. That's the choice you're going to have to make. And I think that in hearing that, it's better if you hear the song. It's copyrighted, obviously.
What is the song called?
Pictures of Adolf by Bill Fay.
You know what? It's like, say his name 3 times and he'll appear. It really does. And it's almost like I'll give Jordan a bone here. It's like his idea of this union spirit, these archetypes that manifest themselves over and over again. It seems like that's what we're going through. I don't believe it's in any sort of metaphysical sense. I think it's just the fact that ideas get passed down. But it does seem like things always make the response.
It's the great, the great coiner of memetics. It's not, So, but I think that, and just in, my caveat to that, it's like, he's saying Christ or Hitler. I don't even necessarily think Christ necessarily means, being a Christian, right? Or like in the real tangible sense. But I mean, Christ is in the spirit of, what is Christ? It's like having compassion, forgiveness and compassion for other people. Like Christ's commandment is see. Christ in the New Testament comes and he says, he upholds the 10 commandments, but he adds a new commandment. He basically says, let me make this real simple for you. If you follow this, everything falls into place. Love your brother as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself, meaning see other people as just as precious as you hold yourself, right? So that's Christ, right? As opposed to Hitler, which is all this, hierarchy, domination, control. I'm better than, you're lesser than, that's that. Yep. Once you start that, where does it end? Right? It's like once you start, and you even see it on the alt-right when they start doing their purity spiral thing. It's like once you start the hierarchy, somebody's better than somebody else, and somebody is pure and somebody's impure, and therefore one person deserves to live and the other does not. Where does that end? There's no end to that, in the same way that the revenge cycle, the eye for an eye, it's like it never ends. Somebody does something and then you get them back, then they get you back, then you it never ends. It never ends. Somebody just says, just stop. Like, okay, like we're going to cut this out, so.
It's the, what they believe in, natural selection, sort of. It goes back to that. And it's the greatest criticism of the ethno-state, in the sense that what is white? And once you wipe out all the people of color, and once you wipe out all what you call the degenerates, the gays and the transsexuals, once you wipe out all those people and you just have your Caucasians, Now what's white? Am I white? I got a pretty big nose. You'll probably wipe me out. What after that? Your hair's a little.
It's going to be a bunch of people in a trailer park, like just, looking at each other funny, like, or just like, oh yeah, we got to round up all the people with brown hair or something, it's just.
Yeah, and then cultural Marxism will turn into Caucasian Marxism, right? They'll always, it will never end. And you're right. And the difference between Hitler and to be fair, if you talk to an alt-righter, they will say, well, my brothers have compassion for me. I love my people. We love each other. Yes, you do. But here's the thing. You're getting it at a cost. It's not coming for free, whereas Christ gave it for free. It's called grace. You can give love for free. You don't need to command over someone and rule over them for them to accept it. And when I was in the movement, just real quick, I constantly would degrade myself and think I was infected and impure. If I wanted to go out and party, if I wanted to go out and have some fun, if I wanted to do this or that or have this opinion, I felt like this was an infection that the liberal media had put into me by indoctrinating me as a child. And I constantly felt like I had to expel that parasite. In ContraPoints, Natalie talked about this very recently with David Pakman. She says that fascism very much is obsessed with this idea that it's like an organism that's prone to infection. And that's very much the idea. I just got off the phone with a Hispanic girl who she internalized this. And she felt that she was impure because she bought into it too. And she said she was in love with Richard. They tear you down.
Well, it's also, the whole point about internalized racism, that people of color experience, not even in relation to the alt-right, but just in terms of the white supremacy, the embedded white supremacy in American culture, where people internalize it, and then, it's talking about internalized racism and internalized self-hatred that they picked up from these cultural messages. It's the more if you really stop and think about that, the more you really stop and think about that, the more heartbreaking it really is.
It's just about thinking, I'm not good enough. I need to constantly do better. I'm all for self-improvement. These things are great. But the idea that you're infected with some sort of disease and you have to purge it from yourself, the lengths you'll go to purge that from yourself, you will destroy everything about yourself. And this is what Stefan would do. Stefan would teach you need to break yourself down and rebuild yourself. It's the tactics they use in armed forces. It's the tactics they use.
Stuff. So I want to. We should probably come to a close, but I want to.
It sounds like we're going to go on all night here.
Yeah. Do you know who Robert J. Lifton is?
No, you're giving me tons of stuff to look up.
Robert J. Lifton was a psychiatrist who researched cults, and he did a ton of great. So look, if you look up Lifton criteria, or Robert J. Lifton
last name,
Lifton.
Okay.
And let's see. So he has a classic checklist to see whether you're in a cult or not. And I just want to go through this with you real quick, as related to the alt-right. Okay.
You want me to answer them?
Yes. Criteria.
Shoot.
Okay, let me just find it real quick. So it's called Lifton's 8 Criteria for Thought Reform. Okay, so I'll throw this out and with a little description in each one, and then you tell me how this applies to the alt-right, or if it does. I'll
tell you how it applies. I'll just tell you how it applied to me when I was going through this. Okay,
perfect. That's even better, actually. Okay, so number 1, minute control. This involves the control of information and communication, both within the environment and ultimately within the individual, resulting in a significant degree of isolation from society at large.
Yeah, the fake news walled garden, as I like to call it. You can't listen to sources outside. They're not giving you the truth. We have the real truth. We have the hidden knowledge, the red pill that's been hidden from you. Yes, do not go outside our circles. I did not watch any news sources while I was in this. I listened to only the people that were vetting each other, that would go on each other's shows. So I was very much in a walled garden.
This is crazy, right? Because if you think about it, this is exactly what Scientology does, right? If you're in Scientology, you're not allowed to watch news or go on the internet. You're not allowed to have the internet if you're in Scientology, if you're in the Sea Org, or if you're not a celebrity, but if you're really in their cult, you don't have access to information because they don't want people seeing contradictory information. But what you're saying is insane, because you're on the, like in reality, you're sitting on a computer, you have access to all of the information in human history
Well, remember, though, it's not just the fact that they tell you to search outside. It's also the fact that the way these systems work is you will only be fed what you're looking at. So it's even more sinister. Not only do they isolate you with their rhetoric and what they tell you about the other, but the algorithm isolates you itself.
But then also, like, you load a belief system that becomes a filter through which you take in information. Wow. Okay. So
I was completely transformed. I saw the world in a completely different lens through this period.
So it's like a hypnotic thing where they completely isolate you from society and, contradictory information, even though the reality is you have access to infinite information, right? It's like no one's holding a gun to your head. Nobody, but like they put blinkers on so that you don't see it. It's crazy. Okay. Number 2. So one check. Okay. Really, that's great. Like, wow, this is actually very helpful because it's like, how the fuck did they do this without a physical cult? Okay. Number 2, mystical manipulation. There is manipulation of experiences that appear spontaneous, but in fact were planned and orchestrated by the group or its leaders in order to demonstrate divine authority or spiritual advancement or some special gift or talent that will then allow the leader to reinterpret events, scripture, and experiences as he or she wishes.
Is this kind of the Trump effect, where Trump kind of like, I'm not, it's not totally connecting with me what you're saying there, but
so an example of how this would work, it's like, so you imagine like Charles Manson, right? This is how this, Charles Manson would be like, I'm going to use something. This is not something, I'm just making something up, but it would be something like, in the next 5 days, by the will of my magical power, I will make something that was obviously going to happen. A plane will fall out of the sky because I just think it, because I'm angry at my followers. And then lo and behold, 4 days later, a plane falls out of the sky. And actually, it's just coincidence because honestly, planes are probably always falling out of the sky. So you can just like pick it from the newspaper and say, look, there, it proves that I have mystic power and therefore that I can exercise this over followers who leave or something like that, right?
Well, there's a lot of predictions that these talking heads will make, and then those predictions do. Alex Jones is the best example of this. Alex Jones will come out with an outrageous prediction, an outlandish prediction, and then in some way, it's like in some way true. The gay frogs, just research the gay frog. They're turning the frogs into the water. There was a truth to that. Right? There was a truth to that.
That story as a journalist, like that was actually true. There was the researchers who discovered that at the UC Davis or San Francisco were harassed and stalked by big ag people. It's crazy. It's a crazy story. It was reported on Democracy Now! But when Alex Jones about, it just sounded totally, it's Alex Jones effect. Right.
So yeah, every once in a while they'll have this thing where they'll make a prediction like that, and then it comes true, and then you say, well. All right. They got the information. They got the real sources.
What about the Keck stuff and the meme magic?
Well, yeah. Well, I think that would be like, that would go into the more spiritual part of it. And that gets your the conspiratorial part of your brain working. During a lot of this time, I was trying to get away from conspiracy theories. I was trying to reject a lot of that stuff because I had fallen into the 9/11 hole for a while. And I was trying to reject that. But when I saw the meme magic, there was moments where I thought, wow, have we fallen into another dimension where Trump is president? There was an esoteric sense to me that was like, it made me stop and think. I won't lie.
You understand how that trick works, right?
Can you explain that to me? I think I know. Is it like when you're driving a car, like you buy a car and then you're driving, you start to see that car everywhere?
Yes. There's actually a part of the brain called the reticular activating system that turns on. But it's just confirmation bias, right? It's like you tell yourself to look for something and you're going to find it, because the reality is the world is infinite information available, and our brains are constantly trying to make sense of it. And the way we tend to make sense of it, for better and often for worse, is by creating a story about the world to make sense of it. And then people become trapped in those stories and it becomes a real problem. But it's just like confirmation bias, where it's like, if I say, look for red for the next day, you're going to see red everywhere, but you're going to be seeing lots of blue all the time, but your brain's not going to be registering it. So in the same way, if somebody says, oh, look for evidence that I don't know, white people are being replaced, or look for evidence that, as some ethnic group is orchestrating some conspiracy, then your brain will interpret what's actually just random chaotic information to fit it to the narrative, which is how confirmation bias works. The whole point of the scientific method is to guard against it. But it's the same with, like people get super into numerology, where it's like, they decide, for instance, a classic example is they decide a number is mystical, like let's say 1111 or 23, right? Then they start seeing it everywhere. Well, okay, the reality is you're seeing infinite numbers all the time anyways. You were already seeing that number. Now you've just sensitized your brain to be aware of it, right? That's how confirmation bias works. And I actually think it's fascinating because you can hack it and you can decide what you want to have confirmation bias for, which is a real kind of magic, right? Where you can say, well, I'm going to train my brain to look for opportunities to be more healthy. I'm going to train my brain.
Have you done this?
Oh yeah. I mean, this is magic, right? You train your brain to say, okay, well, I'm going to look for opportunities to gain wealth. I'm going to look for opportunities to help. Like right now, like in the last, let's say 4 months, I've made the shift within myself where I've been training myself to say, okay, I'm going to look for opportunities where I can give love. Right? Or I'm going to look for opportunities where I can contribute and make a difference. And, in the last few, I'm not bigging myself up. I'm just saying, just as an example of how this can work, in the last 3-4 months, I've raised all this money for children in Nepal. I raised money for children in Africa. I raised money for one of my mentors who's suffering from leukemia and may have saved on the order of 8 or 9 lives. I don't know. But it's like all those opportunities were always there. I just wasn't training my brain to look for them. So if you train your brain to look for that, you'll see it. Or if you train your brain to look for ways of career advancement, you'll see it. There's not one right thing for everyone, and it changes throughout your life. But if you train your brain to look for the red evidence of the red pill being true, lo and behold, your brain is going to filter that, So it's very, you have to be very aware of that confirmation bias. So it's actually not mystical at all. It's just you're telling your brain to pick up information out of an infinite field, right?
Well, we'll have to talk at a later time, and you can help me learn how to deconstruct that because it's it's magic. It's a strong tool.
Yeah. Well, it's simple. Just decide something. Decide on something.
How do you get someone else to come out of that?
Okay. Well, good question. All right. So the first thing is you have to. So here's one way to look at this. If somebody has a belief, you think of it like Tony Robbins talks about it this way. You have somebody has a belief. It's like a table, right? So the surface of the table is the belief, and then it has all these references. So the legs of the table are references, and what the references are experiences that they've had or information they've taken in. That seem to prop up that belief, right? Seem to validate that it's true, right? Like, for instance, somebody decides that, somebody got cut off in traffic once by a black person. Therefore, that's proof of their racist beliefs. It's like, we laugh, but people do this all the time, right? So, so what you do is first you sweep the legs. You kick out all the references. Right. And by getting them to question the references. And it can be as simple as like, well, look up, there is a concept called The Work by Byron Katie. It's just a series of questions. And this is useful.
See, this is the approach I've been trying to take. I'm trying to get away from debating someone. I used to when I would want to convince someone of something, I'd try to just attack them with the points. Now I'm trying to just ask them questions and get them to question the entire premise. So the what is it? The
Work by Byron. The Work
by you broke up there by Byron what?
Byron Katie. So I'm going to give you some magic tools here. It's just a series of questions, right? And this is it. When you question a belief, you kick out a belief by asking these 4 questions. Number 1, is it true? Right?
Okay.
Number 2, can you absolutely know that it's true?
Mm-hmm.
Number 3, how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought?
How do you react?
Or another way of putting this is, how do you feel? How does it make you feel when you have that thought? Right? And usually when we're talking about some of these beliefs, it's like probably pretty shitty, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
well, a lot of the beliefs I had.
There you go. So it's like, first you get somebody questioning, well, okay, well, is it true? Well, yes. Well, can you absolutely know, how can you absolutely know that it's true? Well, at that point, a little crack begins to open. It's like, well, like if I really start to think about it, and then third is, okay, well, how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? How do you feel when you have that thought? Kind of scared and disempowered and afraid and angry all at the same time. Well, and then you don't even say anything. It's like, then they should realize, well, that's not good, right? And then last question is, who would you be without that thought? Right. There's the opening.
And that's probably the pros. That's for them, though. They want that nostalgia and identity.
Okay. Well, that's just that. It's that simple, right? And you can do this if you have your own self-defeating thoughts and things like that. So that's just one example. There's lots of ways to do it. But then the other one is, then you give them, once the belief is destabilized, right? Well, you kick out the references. You show that the references for the belief are not true, or not absolutely true, or there may be another way to see it. And then you give them a new belief, but then you have to prop up the new belief with new references, right? So, for instance, all people are, you shouldn't be racist. We love everyone. So here's an example of this. You look at somebody like Christian Piccolini, right? And he talks about his moment of when his conversion away from far-right extremism was he was working in a record shop that was selling Skin music, but was also selling, you know the story, right?
Yeah, I think so. I was just listening to him give a talk today. He also talked about the birth of his child.
Well, that's powerful for most people, no matter what, right? That will snap people out of their selfish things, usually. The thing about the alt-right is they play on this whole biological reproductive thing and all that, which is a real deep hook for people. So his story is he opened a record store to sell skinhead music, but in order to stay afloat, in order to get enough income, he also had to sell other types of music. It was not just skin music, because then his story wasn't going to get enough money. And so because of that, other people started coming into his store who were of other races, right? And so he was interacting with them, and he kind of became friends with a lot of them and realized, like, wait, these stories I've been told about people are just total nonsense, right? And often with hate groups, a lot of times what you see happening is when it seems to me, I've read this many times, that a really powerful trigger for people is when somebody who is another race, orientation, religion, Jewish person, Black person, shows them compassion and forgiveness. I've seen this in many accounts of de-radicalized hate people. Now, there's a danger in that this puts an unfair expectation on people of color to be, magical and all loving, and it's just an unfair expectation of other human beings that they should be saints, right? It's just too much to ask of people. So there's a bit of and it's also unfair to put the onus of de-radicalization on targeted people. It's like, no, the onus of de-radicalization is on the people who have been radicalized. But I'm just sharing these as it demonstrates that, when these situations have happened, we shouldn't expect them. But when they do happen, it seems they have a very powerful effect. So in that case, in Christian Piccolini's case, I would love to talk to him. But in his case, he talks about, he started becoming friends with people of other races, and then it started to fall apart for him, because all of a sudden he's got new references supporting a different belief. It's like, well, wait, the new belief is being built, right? And then finally, ultimately, what you have to do is get people to associate massive pain to having the undesired belief and associate total pleasure to the new belief. It's this simple, right? Yeah. If you stay an extremist, what's your life going to be like? No, really think about it. Let's say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, who are you going to be? Who do you love right now that's in your life that's not going to be there anymore? Where are your career options going to be? Are you going to be employable? Are you going to be able to make money? Are you Who are you going to be internally? Even more importantly, what are you thinking when you go to sleep? When it's 4 a.m. and nobody's watching, and you think that you're all alone with your thoughts, and it's just you, and there's no internet, and there's no fronting, there's no artifice, there's no trolling, there's no memes. In your heart of hearts, how do you feel about yourself at 4 a.m. when you're awake because you can't go to sleep? Do you feel, what's in your heart? And then you take 10 years, 20 years, stacking of that, what's that going to be like versus, and then you just get them to the point where it's so overwhelming that they're like, fuck, because it's true, right? It's like, this is a path of just a heartache, right? And isolation and pain and hatred, in the true, in all senses, right? Not just in the political sense, but being filled with that, it's like, imagine what that does to somebody's body over the long term, right? So, and the people around them that they loved or who once loved them. So, and then you okay, well, what's the alternative? If you drop this, think about, what's that going to be like? Being able, being accepted, being forgiven, having lots of friends, not having all your energy sapped by this vampiric belief system, being employable, making a difference, maybe the emotional trigger of, because people, by the way, as we've established in this conversation, people in this movement, on some level, they're looking for connection. They're looking to be significant. They're looking to be special. And they want a sense of family. They want a sense of belonging. Well, what if there are other ways to do that? What if, what if you can get that sense of, as you are right now, you've made this powerful shift where you said for yourself, look, I'm going to get a sense of, and then you got the, you made a decision that was a powerfully brave and moral decision. And you said, I'm going to get the significance. I'm going to be fulfilled by helping de-radicalize people and get people out of this. And then you immediately got new references that were like, now you, like you said before, like all these people showed you love, all these people accepted you, all of a sudden you had all these social connections, and so all of a sudden you had all these references to support that this was the correct, and how much better, by the way, this is a real question, how much better does this feel now than when you were deep in the throes of that?
Well, I don't want to speak too soon because I'm getting a big love bomb and I'm on a dopamine high or whatever, right? But it's just that I don't feel, what I will say 100%, I don't feel the anxiety of I have to pretend to be someone else and I have to think that there's some kind of poison inside of me that I have to get out. That's gone. It just went away when I came over, even before I got the platform. Like, it just went away because all of a sudden, the people that I'm associating with now, they don't care if you're gay, you're trans. They don't care if you think this way or that way. As long as your beliefs aren't exclusionary and wanting to put power over people and oppress people, you can do whatever you want. If you're exhibiting behavior that's unhealthy for you, people are going to warn you and they're going to sit and want to have a conversation with you about that. But as far as like telling you have to live this strict, rigid, essentialist way of thinking, I don't have that anymore, and it feels so freeing. I don't go into a mic chat anymore and get berated and made fun of. They commented about my nose. I've been made fun of about my nose for a long time. I was self-conscious about my nose up until I made that video. And you know what? Whenever I talk to people on the other side, they say, I like big noses. They're cute. They say things like that. They're like, there's nothing wrong with a big nose. And so I was like, well, wait, you guys aren't going to make fun of me for that? No, why would we? And when I was on the other side of it, and I don't know if it's a political thing or if it's just like people get a mindset, but that's gone. And I'm grateful for that. And that's probably where a lot of my angst and my depression, that and the feeling isolated.
Wow.
That's where those negative feelings came from.
It's interesting. Natalie Wynn, ContraPoints, I have infinite love for. I honestly think that I would love to talk to her too. I'm a big supporter of her on Patreon because I honestly think that Natalie Wynn is the America's last bulwark against fascism.
Well, Natalie, I don't mean to cut you off, but I speak so highly of Natalie. I owe her everything that I have. And I don't mean to set her up as some kind of like figure that I follow, but I do. I owe her everything. If I had been in if some event had happened in my life and I had become filled with despair, they call it black pill on the other side. If I had joined a radical movement, I don't know what my life would have turned into. Like you said, what is your life going to be like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And I start to think about it now, and I'm like, dear God, she saved my life. And so, but Natalie pays a high cost for what she does. It's easy for me. I've been vaccinated to their bullshit. I can sit and listen to their evil words come out of their mouths, and it doesn't trigger me emotionally. I can just seep it in. It goes in one ear, I process it, and it goes right out the other. But Natalie, the woman has taken it's taken a toll on her mental health to do this. She was not do this. She was not set up to do this. She has sacrificed herself to this movement, and she deserves credit for that.
Please, shout out to, definitely watch her videos for people listening if you haven't. And please support Natalie Wynn on ContraPoints on Patreon. It's the new war effort, honestly. It's like buying war bonds in World War II. It's that important. Yeah. Okay, so let me go through the rest of these criteria. We'll do this more quickly this time because I think this.
Okay.
So far, just to recap, we've got Naloo control, so controlling information and connection with society, and keeping you isolated. Check, right? 2 is mystical manipulation, the whole meme magic and all of this. Check, right? And then, so 3 is demand for purity. The world is viewed as black and white, and the members are constantly exhorted to conform to the ideology of the group and strive for perfection. The induction of guilt and or shame is a powerful control device used here.
Yeah, really fast. So they set up an in-group, they set up an out-group. There are properties that the in-group has to express and inhibit, and then there are properties that the out-group it has that are unacceptable. The Hispanic girl I told you about, she hated the fact that she was brown. She hated the fact of her culture. She thought that her people were, less intelligent, more savage. She had internalized all that impression, and it almost totally destroyed her. I had the same thing. It creates a sense of anxiety, a sense of guilt. It creates a lot of these things. Then to alleviate that sense of anxiety and guilt, you go back to the YouTube to get the dopamine drip, but you also go back to the message and the people that are telling you, yes, we will give you pride. We will give you honor. We will fill you up with everything that you need. Just give me everything that you have.
Wow.
Yeah.
So check. All right.
Check 100%. That is the strongest motivator beyond the Malute control and the mystical manipulation and all that stuff. That is the thing that day to day is on your mind.
Wow. Okay. So we're 3 out of 3 so far. All right. So let's see. Number 4 is confession. Sins as defined by the group are to be confessed either to a personal monitor or publicly to the group. There is no confidentiality. Members' sins, attitudes, and faults are discussed and exploited by the leaders.
Well, it's hard for me because it's a kind of a decentralized thing. But I tell you what, there's things that you would never say if you were around a group of people that shared those beliefs. You would just never express those thoughts. You wouldn't even entertain those thoughts. And if you were to bring them up, you would be expelled. So it's hard when it's a decentralized thing like this. There's no group. Most of the time, unless you have a social group of friends that all share this, or you're involved with meme pages, there's no group that you have to swear allegiance to. This is just a giant tree, and it's like roots out through society. So there's no leader.
Here's a thought about this. It's not exactly what he's defining a dynamic that is very hard to do online. But what about this? There's something that I've noticed. So what I would imagine is that people who are indoctrinated with the alt-right end up, like you use this phrase power level, right? Like you're never supposed to show your power level, right? It's something I've seen them talking about.
And just so anybody knows what that means, power level is just where I know information that you don't know, and I can't tell all the information to you at once, because if I did, you would reject me or socially ostracize me or have me lose my job. So I might want to tell you that, yes, brown people are replacing us, and that's going to lower white birth rates, and that's going to lead to the decay of society. But I can't say that outright. So I'm going to start dog whistling and talking about, have you ever noticed how like Mexicans have this behavior? Have you ever noticed how blacks have this behavior? You give them a little sip of it and you indoctrinate them over time. And I would do this not so much in a Machiavellian way, but it's because I knew it's what I had to do if I wanted to spread my message.
So there's also a sense of, so yeah, it's basically that you hold extreme racist views that you can't say in public, right?
Yeah. Or even if you don't see yourself as being racist, but it's like, well, they see it as racist, right? So, you know that society won't accept it.
So kind of what they're doing there, I would imagine, is it's the guilt hook in the sense that your brain is now filled with these ideologies that you cannot say in public. The only people you can communicate with these things are about these things with are other members of the group, and that you know that if you say them, your real world life will be destroyed. So you have to develop this kind of schizoid personality, and then it's also just, it's like
you start dressing like I'm dressing right now. You start cutting your hair like I have my hair cut right now. You come off looking presentable and nice, and someone will talk to me. They're not going to talk to me if I shave my head.
But also, you I would imagine, internalize the guilt by association, in the sense that because you are now guilty of having those beliefs and ideas, you're hooked to the group, right? Because you believe that like you are beyond redemption, perhaps, or that if you explain, publish, like there's basically nowhere to go at that point other than except to other people who share the ideology. So they hook you by the shared guilt, right? In the same way that a gang, right, if you're committing illegal activities, you can never say that stuff. And so the only people you have that shared bond with are the other people in the gang, right? You're controlled by the shared guilt. And then if somebody tries to leave the gang, they'll be like, well, we can say what you did last summer, or whatever. You kind of see what I mean?
Yeah. I wasn't involved with many groups, so I didn't experience that. But I know that I know there are people in the movement that have experienced that.
But I mean, experience what though?
The holding information over someone's head. So, for example, there have been people that left the alt-right movement before that were actually involved in groups, and the other people doxed them and exposed who they were.
Yeah, so that
shared all their chat logs.
And this is a way that cults keep control of people, right? They get people to confess things and then say, if you leave the group, we'll expose the information, right? So, but it's also,
I'm just glad I wasn't part of an in-group, because they would have done that to me, right?
So there you go. But then I think there's also just that once you internalize the belief, then it's still guilt by association, right? It's like you're still tied to them by holding the guilt of, carrying the meme complex in a way.
I felt guilty the whole time. The IQ shit, I would feel guilty about it. I'd be like, this isn't right, but I don't, it's true, but I would feel guilty about it. And like, and I wouldn't want to talk about it in large part because of that guilt. The IQ shit, I didn't talk about really much at all. I mostly would try to convince people in mass immigration, but the IQ thing, I felt so much guilt about that. I wouldn't talk about it too much with people.
And how was your experience of leaving and then being accepted by people on the outside change that fear?
Well, right. Well, when I got accepted by everybody on the other side, I thought, well, what the heck? Like, they're not guilt tripping me. They're not doing all these things. I thought they were going to eat me up and spit me out. But no, they were just like, yeah, dude, we know some people that happened to, and we're glad to see you over here. We're a little skeptical of you, but we're glad to have you. Okay. And that's crazy. The alt-right would never let a communist come into their group. They say, guys, I'm sorry. I want to, repent my communist ways. They say, no way. You're a commie. Get out of here.
Amazing.
Never let it happen.
There's one thing they say in,
they'll let a liberal in. They'll let a liberal and a conservative in, but they would never let a communist in.
This is really powerful. There's something that I learned from Orthodox Christians, right? I know there's a lot of people are interested in orthodoxy to some extent on the alt-right, but Christianity, it's not just orthodoxy. There's a phrase in Christianity, which is one of the greatest lies of the devil, one of the greatest tools of the devil in keeping people, we could look at this metaphorically, in keeping people in bondage, is making them believe that there are some sins that are so bad that they cannot be forgiven.
Yeah.
Well, what
sounds
is
about right to me.
It's like the whole point of Christianity. It's like forgiveness has been, repentance has been paid. It's like the forgiveness is open to everyone, but people are kept. It's like, oh, it's so bad, I can never be free. So, okay, so 4 out of 4, check. Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. So, all right, number 5 is sacred science. The group's doctrine or ideology is considered to be the ultimate truth, beyond all questioning or dispute. Truth is not to be found outside the group. The leader, as the spokesperson for God or for all humanity, is likewise above criticism.
2 words, race realism.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah, race realism. The belief that this essentialist belief that there are biological differences between the races and we can't escape them, and that explains all the disparities between races in society. And that is a esoteric knowledge. I don't even want to call it esoteric because that's not the way they put it, but it really is. It's like this hidden knowledge that we buried. And so you have to read the Bell Curve because it's the only book that talks about it. And it's not the only book that talks about it because it's bullshit. No, it's the only book that talks about it because all the other publications, they don't want to talk about it. Yeah, the fake science.
Right. Okay.
Whenever I typed in race realism at the end of all this, and it came up as scientific racism on Wikipedia, I got a pit in my stomach.
Wow. Which is why it was, I don't know if you followed this at all, which is why it was so insane to see like Sam Harris repping that book and having the author on and being like, oh, well, it's just, we just have to think about it's just science and numbers. And it's like, no, these things are not without context.
That was such a confirmation bias. That was such a confirmation of my bias when I watched that Sam Harris thing. Okay, there was one thing true in the book, the graph, the chart, the stat, that was true, but the analysis, the political prescription, and actually looking at the stat and trying to figure out why there are IQ disparities, they don't want to go that far. They just say, here's the IQ disparities, and it's because of biology. It has nothing to do with the environment or oppression or any of that stuff. No, it's because it's biology.
It didn't happen, like, for instance, housing. I'm sure you may have read this.
Yes.
Things with Black people in America
broke my heart when Natalie taught me all that, dude. Broke my heart. Redlining, gentrification.
Yeah. And so it was crazy. There was this famous debate between Sam Harris and Ezra Klein, I think, from Vox, where they went at this for like 3 hours, and Sam Harris was like, well, it's the numbers, it's the science. And Ezra Klein is like, okay, first of all, this is not without context. These policies have been used to pass law to discriminate and hurt people of color. And the guy who wrote this isn't just a what do you call it, like an objective scientist. He then spent 20 years in Washington trying to use it to push public policy to get racist stuff enacted. It was so, like Sam Harris. I mean, it's like, dude, like, we did.
He's a grifter.
You think so?
I think so. He's a grifter. He's a little rich kid from wherever, and he just
define grifter, because I know that's a phrase people.
So like, yeah. So it's I learned the phrase from Sam Cedar, and it's basically, I think when I say grifter, I mean political grifters, people that take on a position to make money. They'll buy into an ideological belief because it's profitable. And that's who I see Sam Harris as. He doesn't seem to really have any like real beliefs. I think when he goes into his meditation, that's in his true state. When he empties his brain, that's his true state. Because other than that, he's just whichever way the wind blows.
Yeah. And we can see that's, I think, one of the real problems here is that all these people, whether it's Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson or Steven Crowder or Dave Rubin or Alex Jones, saw that this was a thing on the internet and decided to monetize it and then spread it, spread this cancerous memeplex to the mainstream. So
Gavin McInnes is the best example of that. And you should research how right-wing, sometimes like a lot of right-wingers, when they fail as comedians, they will just become right-wing pundits. And so Crowder and McInnes were 2 examples of this.
Yikes. All right. So 5 out of 5. Let's see. So 6, loading the language. The group interprets or uses words and phrases in new ways so that often the outside world does not understand. This jargon consists of thought-terminating cliches, which serve to alter members' thought processes to conform to the group's way of thinking. And I should clarify what thought-terminating cliches is, because this is really important at all levels of society. It's something that sounds profound but is actually meaningless, like live, laugh, love, or always look on the bright side, or be here now, or, like there are these kind of like, you always hear these things thrown around where it's just kind of like, oh yeah, it's like impossible to disagree with. And it just stops you from having rational discursive thoughts. So, but that aside, how does that apply, or does it?
You see a lot of things get thrown around. I don't know if this applies here, but Stefan Molyneux likes to say not an argument a lot. Whenever someone tries to bring up a point, he'll say not an argument. That's not an argument, not an argument. And then also within the race and IQ stuff, I don't know if this is a point to what you're talking about, but you'll hear, oh, so you're trying to pretend that there's no biological differences between the race. Like evolution doesn't have an effect on the brain. Like they'll repeat. Basically, I just hear talking points a lot. That's what I'm taking from what you're saying. I just hear these like talking points that are very baseless and kind of like, I'm trying to think of some more. I'm drawing a blank, but they have a lot of talking points that are very baseless and just kind of cliche.
Okay. But there's also the kind of using the internal language. So the first part of that was the group interprets or uses words and phrases in new ways so that often the outside world does not understand. So the whole thing about using mimetic terms, like all these weird, all the jargon that the group has.
Well, red pill would probably fall into that category. I'm trying to think. There are a lot of, they do have a lot of jargon that they use. Red pill, great replacement. I don't know if that would apply to what you're talking about, but it seems like it does to me. I thought a little bit about your loading the language. Do you mean like almost like where they water down language? Like terms like cultural Marxism?
Well, that could be part of it, but also I'm thinking more like this stuff on, like when you see, I can't think of examples, but when you see like on the Chans, like on Poll, where they're like using all their jargon.
Well, yeah. So there's just like inside words. Like you'll hear me say stuff like red pill, black pill, white pill. I'll call people
normies, boomers,
normies. So gamers are guilty of this too. Gamers call people normies and boomers and zoomers, and you've got they call conservatives and anybody basically that's not an alt-righter, you call you a cuck. They have words. Yeah, they'll have words for Jews that they use. Yeah, there's a lot of inside language that they use. But I always saw that as a way to obfuscate what they're really talking about.
But it's also like an internal. So I'll reread the section. So loading the language, the group interprets or uses words and phrases in new ways so that often the outside world does not understand. So in this case, it'd be using all this jargon. It's like, so that normies can't understand what you're saying.
Right? The symbolism too, like the OK symbol, the milk, the frog, like a lot of these things aren't just, they're ways that it's so hard to talk about it because it has a purpose on many different levels. But one of the ways it's used is to spread the idea amongst each other without revealing to the outgroup what you're talking about.
Okay, so check. So we got 6 out of 6.
Yeah.
So 7, doctrine over person. Members' personal experiences are subordinated to the sacred science, and any contrary experiences must be denied or reinterpreted to fit the ideology of the group.
Say that again.
Okay. Doctrine over person. Members' personal experiences are subordinated to the sacred science, and any contrary experiences must be denied or reinterpreted to fit the ideology of the group.
Yeah. So let's say I started having experiences around, I'd spent a lot of time around black people in college, but then I found myself around some black people after that. It was one black friend in particular. And then he started showing me a lot of content because he watched, he was on, I would call it BlackTube, he watched like Vlad TV and a lot of these things. And I would listen to these black people talk. And I had all these biases that I had built up in my head based on what was put in my head and probably stuff that I had picked up when I was young. And I started listening and I thought, well, wait a second. The things that they're saying are not what I've been taught. Are they lying? After a while, it got to me and I realized that what I believed was bullshit. But if I would have said that, if I had an in group and I had said that, and I see it in my comment section now, they're saying, making comments that no, you need to drop your feelings and your personal experiences. This is about the cold hard facts. And if you want to look at the data, and they'll draw you into this big long diatribe and like,
right, which is also a standard internet,
that's
internet.
kind of gaslighting though, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Right. And also using the facts don't care about your feelings thing. It's definitely gaslighting. And it's like, because it's like, it automatically says, I have the facts, you don't. You see people just do this when they're debating on Fox News or CNN, it's just a way of dominating the other person. Those aren't the facts that I have, that type of thing. So,
yeah.
And if you're debating with an unskilled person, it's easy to just steamroller over somebody like that, as opposed to somebody who can counter has brought their own studies and can counter with their own facts. But usually you don't get debates like that unless both people are professional.
Well, this is what they're going to try to do if they reel me into a debate. The alt-righters, like the figureheads, want to debate me now, and this is what they're going to do if they get me in there. They're going to bring up some minute little statistic, and I'm not going to have the fucking dialogue tree to counter it. So they're going to say, "See, lib owned," right? And
you can always engage by that, just by not engaging with it, or you can.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you see that people do this all the time on CNN or Fox and say like, "Well, I think you just change the frame." It's like, well, I think what we should really be talking about. Like, I understand what you're saying, and I think that what we should really be talking about is,
and bring it back to something more fundamental and like conceptual.
Well, you understand the concept of frame, right?
Yeah, that framing the argument. It's what Ben Shapiro talks about. It's like how Ben Shapiro constructs arguments. He'll just constantly reframe it back into his terms. So if you talk about like transgenders, he'll say, well, look, we're talking about mental health here, and we're talking about the biology of the situation. They were born.
Exactly. So you just counter and put it back into your own, it's like, because as soon as you're in the frame with them, it's like if you join their debate, you automatically lose because it's like you're playing on their territory now.
Yeah.
Right? Set up the game. So you're not going to win, right? So it's like you keep it in your frame. Okay. So we got 7 out of 7. Last one, number 8, dispensing of existence. The group has the prerogative to decide who has the right to exist and who does not. This is usually not literal, but means that those in the outside world are not saved, unenlightened, unconscious, and they must be converted to the group's ideology. If they do not join the group or are critical of the group, then they must be rejected by the members. Thus, the outside world loses all credibility. In conjunction, should any member leave the group, he or she must be rejected also.
Yep. So you're seeing what's happening to me now. And then you're also, so the way I would break it down in terms of the movement I was in, the alt-lighters, which are less focused on race, which is what I was. Less focused on race is that's the core principle. That's the fundamental thing that we need to drive. Alt-lighters are more concerned about IQ and culture. And we would look at the liberals and the leftists and
which
say,
are dog whistles for race, but okay.
Yeah, well, they are dog whistles for race. And when you get to the bottom of the funnel, you realize that and you say, oh shit, like I've kind of been like, I've been a puppet this whole time.
Right. Jordan Peterson saying, "Mo Western civilization."
Mo Western civilization. And we'll talk about that another time. Yeah. That's white civilization. And I had a conservative, I had an alt-right. He said he was a conservative, he was an alt-righter. He admitted to that to me in a Discord call just the other night. He said, yeah, it's white civilization. Thank you. Richard Spencer will admit to the same thing. And so if you're an alt-lighter, then it's the liberals and the leftists. And then if you're an alt-righter, then it's anybody who's not white.
So we got 8 out of 8 then.
8 out of 8, brother. It's a cult.
You were officially in a cult.
I can't believe that. And I used to watch documentaries on cults and shit when I was in high school, and I always thought, well, I could never fall into that. It's so ridiculous. How would anybody fall for that? But they don't educate us on cults correctly. They just show you the ridiculousnwith of it. Well, but you don't see the ridiculousness of it when you go into it.
Cults very often target educated and middle class people because they want people with resources, right? And the ability to leverage cultural power. So there you go. Look at Scientology. I mean, look how many Hollywood people they have in that thing. All right. Well, I think we've been going for 3 hours, but I want to, I think this has been a very productive conversation, and I want to reiterate, you've been very brave in, like you were going down the wrong path. Like, let's be clear, for a while. But it's good you've done a brave thing in leaving, and I think that your story is really important, and I want to underline that. And just in the same way, like you've left and you got the love and connection that you were looking for outside of the group, and things have been okay for you and have gotten a lot better. Right? Yes or no? Right?
Yeah. So I just want to say again, this is all about mental health. This is all about, fixing the isolation, the anxieties that people feel, and redirecting that in a way that's positive, and not about filling people with fear and then giving them some sort of target. I am so much better off. I don't have those anxieties anymore. I don't have that feeling of being impure, and it's all gone. And I'm getting nothing but love on the other side. Even before I had the platform, do not think that this was just because I have a bunch of fans. No, before I had the platform, I was getting that same unconditional love. Just like I talked about, it's the love that Jesus gave. It was grace. You don't have to be religious to accept that concept.
That's beautiful. All right. Well, it sounds like you got big plans to continue helping other people get out. Where can people find you online?
For right now, I will have more platforms in the future, but for right now, you can find me on my YouTube channel at Faraday Speaks. That's FARADAYSPEAKS. And then you can find me on Twitter at the same handle at Faraday Speaks.
All right. Well, it was wonderful to talk to you. I wish you great luck in your new adventure going forward. And I think that, one thing that I said to you on Twitter is, one thing to keep in mind is, because I do expect you're going to get pushback as well, both from people on the right, and there may be, people may attack you on the left. It's not like the thing of leftists attacking people on Twitter isn't real, right? It's like that does happen.
I've seen a little bit of it. It's been very fringe. I do want to be clear, I have seen it, but it's been so fringe, I haven't even hardly noticed it.
Okay. Well, it happens, and I think that, one of the things about the internet is to always focus on it's not only to keep focused on your positive interactions on the internet, but it's also to remember that the negative people, if they do show up, are always more vocal than the positive ones. And I think that what is very likely to happen in your case is that a lot of people may choose to leave or de-radicalize because of things that you're saying or the story you're spreading, and you're never going to hear about it. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is they may not want to share, but also they're not going to want to take the step of sharing that they were in the group. They would probably much rather leave and move on. So it's very likely that lots and lots of people are going to be powerfully impacted by what you're saying, and you're never going to know about it. And so I would just, I think it's good to bear that in mind, and don't get discouraged if it seems like you're getting negative pushback in opposed to positive. It sounds like you're getting lots of positive. I mean, yes, the dopamine hit will wear off, but as it goes on, and I think Christian Piccolini is a great person to be in touch with, and a good model. And
Christian has been great. He's he's been very close to me, and he's been wonderful.
That's great. Yeah, I would love to talk to him too. I would love to. Okay, all right, man. It's been great, and good luck with what comes next.
Thank you, man. Jason, you've been awesome. You've got a lot of knowledge. I would love to have another conversation, maybe even private. And anytime you want to have me on, just let me know.
All right. Hope you really, really enjoyed that. As always, check out magick.me, my school for magic, meditation, and mysticism at magick.me, magick.me. Big changes have been taking effect there, and will be continuing over the next few months. We're doing some serious stuff there. All right. I will see you there. I will see you in class. Until next time, lots of love. Bye.